I'll call this meeting to order and ask for a roll call attendance vote, please. Roll call attendance, no vote.
Commissioner Franz here, Lisk here, Nelson here, Petroselli,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer
Here.
Mayor Clark
Here.
Chairperson Monty here.
Yep. So we have some public hearings tonight. It looks like the first one is a continuance request. The application is a sketch plan. The location is McChesney Minor Subdivision Lot 2, Zone Residential and Future Development. The applicant is Chris Hawkins, DBA Alpine Planning LLC. The owner, Four Winds Ranch LLLP and Estate of Bernadine C. Endicott. Do we have anyone here representing that? Looks like not.
We'll have a
Yeah,
little bit
you-
of staff report here to
Go ahead.
give you all some background. Excuse me. So, Chair, good evening, everyone. And I just did comments. Nice to see everybody in person. It's been a while, I guess. The whole committee, the whole commission's here. So just a little bit of background. As you mentioned, it's Four Winds Subdivision. This is a sketch plan. The owners, Four Winds Ranch LLE and Bernadine Endicott. Legal description and dimensions, just over 40 acres. Just a little bit of background. The original application was brought to the Planning Commission in June of last year, continued to August, and August those continued to this evening, and then this evening we're requesting the applicant and staff is concurring with it to continue it to January 31st this month. And just wanted to give a little bit of an update because of that. So the status update, the applicant has submitted responses to many of the items that you all and we all discussed at our August meeting. And staff is continuing to work with the applicant team. In fact, we have a meeting tomorrow to go over those responses. So we are actively working with the applicant team. I just don't want you all to think that it's stagnant. We are actively working through those issues. You might remember some of them are pretty major. We have received 5 written comments in this go around. So those were included in the staff report. But again, I'll reiterate that tonight on the docket, if you will, is a continuance. So we're not talking about the merit of the application. If there's any questions or discussion about the continuance, we can do that, but we're not able to talk about the merits of the application this evening, simply because you all don't have the information to review and discuss those. So again, the request is to continue to the January 31st Planning Commission meeting to allow time for staff and the applicant team to continue working through those the outstanding issues. So with that, the recommendation is to just continue, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you all do have that. But, that's what's in front of you this evening.
You're making headway?
Yes. I guess I'd say we know a lot more tomorrow. We're meeting with them. So we've gone back and forth a few times.
So it'll be a pretty big deal at the end of the month. This should be like a full-on meeting. Wait. Yeah.
That would be the hope.
Unless they continue again.
Correct. I'm a little hesitant, but since it was talked about before, one of the major issues is CDOT. We are working, including CDOT in a lot of our conversations. So that is obviously a major consideration. We did receive the traffic impact statement. And so we are going through some of that stuff. It's all preliminary, right? Because it's still a sketch plan, but we want to make sure we're addressing some of the major items at a staff level before we bring it forward again.
Well, thanks for doing that.
Do the commissioners have any questions about the continuance? I believe I need to open this to public comment, but you can only comment on the continuance of this application. Would anyone like to comment on the continuance? I will then close it for public comment. And oh, check in Zoom. Not closed. Okay, closing. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll move to approve the applicant's request to continue the public hearing for this application until the planning commission regular meeting January 31st, 2023.
I'll second that.
And can we get a roll call vote on that, please,
Do you
Karen?
need that?
Don't need
We're all
that.
here.
We don't?
We're all
Yeah,
here.
we seem to always need it. And that seems to be the procedure.
No,
Okay, we're ready.
If we're all here, we just say aye or nay.
Oh,
It's only when we have one. Yeah, we've done that so rarely. You're probably not familiar.
I've never met that. So,
Just ask.
everyone in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? I mean, you can't really record that everyone said aye, right? So you ask if anyone.
It's in the
opposed.
minutes.
well, there's no negative, so.
And the other thing about, Robert's Rules of Order is you typically are supposed to repeat what happened, passes unanimously.
Ah, okay, and then that goes in the record and that's
Yeah.
good enough. Passes unanimously, thank you.
Very good.
We're having fun now.
The next application is an amendment plat of lot 15, Parkside subdivision. Location, Parkside subdivision, lot 15. Address 702 North Laura Street, 704 North Laura Street, 706 North Laura Street. Zone residential. Applicant Amanda Gerhart. Owner Habitat for Humanity of the San Juans. TJ.
Excellent. And Madam Chair, if I may, there's a second agenda item. I would say let's go ahead, and it has to do with the same application. Go ahead and open that, read that item. And
Okay.
we'll discuss both of them at the same time, and then we'll have to make separate motions, but at least we can have the conversations together.
So number 3 is application for a variance to allow a 0-foot side setback for townhomes. Location Parkside subdivision, lot 15, 702, 704, and 706 North Laura Street. Zone residential, applicant Amanda Gerhart, owner Habitat for Humanity of the San Juan.
Thank you very much. So, as mentioned, we're going to have two, well, it's a number of requests, one being a plat amendment, and then the other being a few different variances for each of those, but they are for the same property here. So it's property is located north of and adjacent to, north of Railroad Avenue, east of and adjacent to North Laura, up in Parkside subdivision. Sorry, I need to get my Zoom box out of the way. There we go. So just for those who aren't familiar with the public process, this is the general process. We'll start with the staff report and we'll open it up to the applicant. I do know that the applicant is here in the audience, so they'll be able to provide some clarity or presentation. And then we'll open it up for public hearing. And what we'll do when we do that, we'll open it up for both the plat and the variance requests. And then once we have that, all of the public comment has been heard and closed public comments. And then that turns over to the planning commission discussion. And then you can make a motion and vote from there. So that's the general process. So as you mentioned, Chair, the owners are the Habitat for Humanity of the San Juans. The legal description is lot 15 Parkside subdivision. There it is on the right, highlighted in the green. The past approvals, just to kind of put it into context, is that Parkside subdivision was originally approved in 2007, and there were a couple of amendments to that. Basically, they were plat notes that we've incorporated in our review for this. Some of them do apply to this specific property. And then more recently, a building permit for the triplex that's out there right now was issued in 2022. So it was reviewed, approved through the building permit process. And the zoning district is our low density residential. So let's start off with there are 4 requests. And therefore we'll be asking for 4 motions throughout. The first is, variance number 1 is for a 0-foot setback. 0-foot side setback for the south side of lot 15A. Okay, so that's the top lot, the green line on the bottom of it, if you will. Variance number 2 is a 0-foot setback for both sides of lot 15B, which is the middle lot. So you can see again, the green lines there are the lot lines that we're talking about. The third variance is a 0-foot setback for the north side of lot 15C, and lot 15C is that bottom or the far south lot. And then the last request is for a plat amendment to create 3 townhome lots. So, okay, just a little bit more kind of background and those who may not follow this at home. But what we're doing is basically creating 3 townhome lots so that the units themselves can be sold individually rather than one underlying property owner who owns the entire building and say leases or rents out the units. So that's what we're doing here. It's essentially a townhome plat. But since the town does not have a townhome plat process, subdivision process, this is how we have to go through it right now per the code standards. So it's that's what we're doing. Does anybody on the commission have any questions about that concept? I just want to make sure that.
TJ, I think it might be helpful just to point out that this normally would have been done at the other
Correct.
end of the process, at the beginning of the process before construction. And for whatever reason, staff turnover both at Town Hall and at Habitat has led us to be doing it at this point, which to people more experienced with the planning process might be scratching their heads going, why are we doing this now?
That is correct. Yep, that is very correct. The building permit was issued over 3 years ago. And
COVID staff changes, a lot of factors, but
yep,
normally this would have been done at the beginning of the process rather than
Correct.
the end, but that
Correct.
doesn't keep it from being able to be appropriate, so.
yep.
Makes sense.
Is it really better to do it before the houses are built?
We're gonna get to that a little later in this process when we're talking about the revisions to the code, right?
Yep.
This will be an example of why we're making some of the changes that we are, so we can get into that deeper shortly.
Given the current standards and processes of the code, this technically should have been done before. So just going through the analysis, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. It's in a lot more detail, as always, in the staff report. So those listening at home or in the audience, just know there's a lot more background in the staff report, and we can answer any questions as needed. But so first thing, how does this property fit into the comprehensive plan? The property is classified as a single family neighborhood in the future land use map. It is just about an acre, 3 residential units, and therefore that's a density of just over 6 units per acre, and that's within the density thresholds of the land use classification. The use of single family homes and duplexes. It seems a little bit weird, but again, there's some. The plat was approved with 3 units on it. It's a large enough lot, and so it kind of fits in. So we're looking at 3 single family units. I know it's kind of, again, a little bit of a hard thing to wrap your head around. It's not so much a triplex, it's 3 single family units. So in that case, it does fit to the master plan. The land use, as mentioned, the current use, and this, again, the home is built. If you guys, if anybody's out there, the home is built up there. There are 3 units with 1 owner right now. It is allowed by conditional use in the zone district. But again, because there's a plat note specific to this property, specifically allowing 3 units, the interpretation is that it was always intended to have 3, therefore that, in essence, is the conditional use permit for this property. So therefore, it would be allowed, and in addition, the building permit was issued. Oh, sorry, that's a typo, it should be 2020-038. The proposed use, the only real difference is now we're going from one property to 3 properties with 3 different property owners for each of the units. So very similar. And here's where again we get a little bit, struggle to fit into the confines of the code, but the overall intent is definitely, at least from staff perspective, being met. So we looked at it in 2 areas. We looked at the overall lot 15 as it exists today. It meets the minimum requirements of the dimensional standards, lot coverage, setbacks from the existing exterior property lines, and things like that. And then when we get into the individual lots, the things that are not necessarily meeting the specifics of the code are the lot width and minimum lot size. But with the townhome component, we're actually going to defer back to the overall, right? So we're kind of juggling between a few different elements on that. But everything else is being met through this, with the exception, as mentioned, of the side setbacks, which are the variances that we'll be going through. So access, each lot will have direct access onto North Flora through a driveway. There's a picture of it right there. The street improvements were previously approved in the subdivision process, and each lot will have each unit will have a garage, single car garage, plus enough area for 1 car on the driveway, therefore meeting the minimum required off-street parking. Utilities, again, all the utilities, water, sewer, road, dry utilities were all installed through the subdivision process and accepted through that process. There's no proposed change in the proposed utilities. So it was all sized for 3 units, it's consistent with 3 units, and then all existing buildings currently have utility connections. So nothing concerning with the utilities, if you will. And then this is a picture of the units out there right now. The first 3 is what we're talking about here. So then into the architectural review. These standards that I have here are the code requirements for architectural review, and then they essentially meet it. So the green line there on the top graphic is showing the kind of a bird's eye view looking down. That's the front building elevation. So you can see that it's articulated and there's relief step backs. It's not a constant plane. And then variation in the building massing. You can see that there's roof pitches and different articulations that kind of break up that massing as well. Garage doors don't dominate the front elevation, and no 2 similar, substantially similar elevations are adjacent to each other. So it's the design, and I'm going backwards. The pictures themselves, they are generally consistent, but they change in color, materials, things like that. So staff has found that it's in general compliance. And then moving over, lastly, on the analysis side to the landscaping. This is another one where because, well, it was originally approved through the building permit process prior to the landscape regulations that were just recently adopted. And so it's just add another wrench to this little this project. It was very difficult to apply the current standards, and so I didn't necessarily go back and cross all the T's, dot all of the I's on this, other than saying that the overall, the column on the far right, it definitely meets minimum requirements. It provides really good landscaping in the plan that was submitted, and therefore we feel that it meets the intent and the spirit of it exceeds it. So yeah, if so desired, I'd actually say maybe there's no way to take some of the landscaping out if planning commission did so desire, simply because of the water conservation components that we talked about with the landscape regulations. But all in all, we do feel that it's consistent with land use regulations, landscape regulations as submitted for that, and then have the breakdown of each lot and how it applies. So with all of that, following the review of the application against the applicable municipal code requirements, staff does find that it meets both the variances and the plat meet the required standard criteria, and therefore we're going to be recommending approval of all 4 of the requests. And I guess I kind of have to go through each of those, so bear with me on some of the stuff. That motion language plus alternative language is in the staff report. But again, here's a summary of the 4 requests. So request number 1 being a variance to allow a side setback of 0 feet for the south side of lot 15A. There's the motion, and we would recommend approval with the conditions. 1, address all comments in the planning review comment letter dated January 6th, 2023 to the satisfaction of town staff prior to the amended plat being recorded with the Ridgway County Clerk Recorder. And 2, the Ridgway Town Council approve the amended plat of lot 15 Parkside subdivision. And again, a lot of these, especially number 2 here and subsequent ones, are just tying them together. We've seen that in the past where we want to make sure that if one gets, if one doesn't get approved, none of them get approved. So we don't end with some unclear information. So here's the alternate motion if so desired. Request number 2 is a variance to allow a side setback of 0 feet for both sides of lot 15B. And again, staff's recommendation is to approve that request with the following 2 conditions. 1, address all comments in the planning review comment letter dated January 6, 2023 to the satisfaction of town staff prior to the amended plat being recorded with the Ridgway County Clerk Recorder. And 2, the Ridgway Town Council approves the amended plat for lot 15 Parkside subdivision. Again, the amended or alternate motion. Request number 3, a variance to allow a side setback of 0 feet for the north side of lot 15C. And again, staff's recommendation is to recommend approval with the following conditions. 1, address all comments in the planning review comment letter dated January 6, 2023 to the satisfaction of town staff prior to the amended plat being recorded with the Ridgway County Clerk Recorder. And number 2, the Ridgway Town Council approves the amended plat of lot 15 Parkside subdivision. And then the last request is number 4 here. It's request of approval for the plat amendment for the amended plat of lot 15 Parkside subdivision. And again, staff is recommending approval, finding that the criteria has been met with the following condition. To 1, address all comments in the planning review comment letter dated January 6th, 2023. So that's all I had. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all might have. I mean, the applicant is here. You may want to provide some comments as well.
Pretty
Questions?
straightforward.
Yeah,
What are the questions that they have?
you do want to ask the questions.
We should let the applicant grant. That's what he wants.
Do you guys have any questions?
I do.
Yeah. Okay, we can ask questions of TJ at the beginning if we want to. That's allowed.
True.
Do you have any questions for TJ?
Well, I just have one. It looks like it's sheet. In our packet, it's sheet C. Something of 6. No, what's it say? It's got some boxes where there should be numbers. There's a drawing let's see. I'm looking at the good sized plan set. There's a page that has a photograph of a fence, 6 foot cedar fence. And then a couple pages past that,
The last page.
well, but and 3 or 4 pages past that, there's a drawing that has a bunch of different lines that are things like right-of-way line, road center line, easement, property line. And one of the darkest one has the letters SF every quarter inch or something, and that looks like where there may be a fence. And I guess there's been some concern about fencing and drainage easement on the east side of the property. It looks like this fence is, if that's what that is to be at the top of the drainage easement on the building side, which is good. Do you know anything about that?
So first, neither of these requests are approving a fence.
Okay,
And we've actually had a few conversations, staff, the applicant, some of the anticipated owners, homeowners, as well as some neighbors to talk about the fence. At this point, I'll let the applicant talk a little bit more about that. But at this point, there are no plans to install a fence. And based on some of the conversations that we've had with the neighbors, there are comments in the staff review letter. And if so desired, we can add some additional conditions on the plat to ensure I shouldn't say the only. One of the major concerns that staff in the town would have is to make sure that drainage easement and swale does not get impeded with either a fence or filling it in. That functions not just for this property, but for the whole development.
Right.
So there are plat notes originally on the plat. It's an easement that's called out as a drainage easement. And therefore, because of that, it does have to remain unimpeded. And at this time, there is no plans for a fence to be installed.
okay, good. That's,
Yeah, that was my question. My question was on the fence, but I was gonna ask the applicant. And what I see here is the fence has already been approved through the building permit process. And it's approved through his landscape.
So a fence meeting the standards of the code, so 6 foot,
Well,
does not require a building permit.
I mean, well, what appears to be the landscape plan that was submitted with the building permit shows a new fence around the back of the property. My concern was that where it was going to sit in relation to that drainage easement, because
Yeah, I would defer to the applicant on that.
Shay and Jen would not put any landscaping in that for that same reason right down the street. So that was going to be my question to the applicant.
I guess we are ready to hear from the applicant.
Thanks for having me tonight. It's always nice when I get to come up to Ridgway, and I'm really more here just to answer any questions that you might all have. I also will let you know we have our engineer that did our plans, construction manager, anybody that you might maybe need to ask questions for are here tonight. I wanted to make them available for you all. And to address the fence, we're not building a fence.
There's no plans to build a fence?
I have no plans to build a fence. We intend on, our units are very close to completion, and so our main focus is to get our families into the homes, and a fence isn't a part of that.
So the fence is part of the landscape plan, and you probably haven't started your landscaping yet because of the time of year.
Yes, it's part of that, but understanding too, some of the things TJ mentioned, that some landscaping standards have changed. We'll be working through those this spring, because as you guys all know, if we plant little baby shrubs right now, they won't make it to stay with us for a long time. So landscaping in that regard will be done in the spring, but we have no plan to build a fence. Habitat will not be building a fence.
Thank you. That's my only concern. They look good, by the way.
Thank you. That's the guy there.
Good job.
Thank you. Any other questions for me? I would be happy to answer any of those.
I had a question. Do you know how much the townhomes would be sold around?
Not just yet. That's all kind of determined by our applicants. We're an affordable housing provider. So, we sell those at way below market rate and dependent on our borrowers. So if they're not able to, we can't sell it for $1 million because they can't qualify for those things. So right now at this time, I don't have that. And we don't have final appraisal until the units are done. We don't have any of those things. So I apologize.
Any other questions?
I follow-up question on the fence. I've been involved talking with the neighbors about the possibility. Would you guys be open to a plat note on the plat saying no fence? On the backside next to maybe, how we work, we have to word it where it couldn't impede the drainage.
I don't think I think the drainage easement on the plat note says it cannot be impeded. I mean, I'm pretty familiar with that drainage easement. Jay and Jen wouldn't want me planting shrubs in there because of a plat note. So I think once an old plat, I think it might already talk to them. Okay. Is that your feeling?
Not knowing the history, I'm probably not as strongly feeling that would be it. If there is a desire, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, that there's no harm in reiterating. So if so desired, there's certainly the ability to just say either one, something along the lines of fence shall not impede drainage in the easement, or just it must stay outside of the easement. However, you all are thinking.
I like that idea. I mean, that ditch drains probably 30 or 40 lots. It drains the backside of the River Park lots and all the east side of the Parkside lot. So, well, I've never seen the water in it. It's still an important ditch. It's not very deep. It's only at the deepest point, 18 inches or 2. Right.
I'd like to put my 2 cents in. I'm not just concerned about the fence, but I was concerned about building any other structure on those. I know that ADUs are not allowed, which I definitely don't want ADUs allowed, but just, I don't know what built here. Can people build storage units or besides a fence? Go ahead, can they?
That's a good point. They could put sheds back there as a temporary.
Yeah. So the common,
Yeah, the common areas.
well, but so you cannot put a structure on an easement. Or at least if you did, whoever the easement holder is has the ability to come in and at the owner's expense, remove it in order to maintain their easement. When we're talking about a drainage easement, it's a little bit different because you just can't put anything in there because anything that you install on it could potentially impede the flow, right? So drainage easement is a little bit different than just like say a water line easement. So I think I would say that no, you can't put any structure on it. We have code requirements that do that. The caveat to it, although, is that if you're under the building code requirements, you don't have to get a building permit. And so a lot of what we've been talking about is that there are uses, there are things that people, property owners, you all in your lots can do just by right, if you will, right? As long as you're meeting the code standards, and then it becomes an administrative or an enforcement thing if it doesn't meet those. So I think that's part of this item as well, that the plat note clarifies what can and can't happen. Although the code, I want to be absolutely clear, the code does not allow anything to impede the drainage. But as you all know, that's a very thick document that most residents are not familiar with, right? So there's plenty of standards and regulations to prevent that. But it's how do we make sure that those who are not in the room right now and part of this conversation don't do it in the future? Does that maybe help?
Helps a lot. Thank you.
A bit of a big sign.
I'm not sure, was I hearing another concern of yours was storage units at all?
Not just anything built out,
Not necessarily on the drainage easement, but
correct.
in the
On the lot.
the lot at all.
Sorry, if I don't want to.
No, go ahead.
We're talking about one drainage ditch. This piece of property has two huge drainage ditches that we're not talking about 50 feet wide. No, we're not. So we're talking about the small one on the east side.
One, and to be clear, what we're talking about now is, should there or is there any restriction on the property owners being able to put up a small storage unit outside the drainage easement, but on the lot itself?
Yeah.
And I don't know that there is or should be.
Correct. So whatever the typical standards are that apply to any our district in our zone property in town would apply here. So you could put it in accessory structures. But it would have to be part of that residence, right? It's not storage units for lease, right? They could put up a shed in the backyard.
But a shed on the south
You
side
would
is
want that to be possible. I don't think we can restrict that.
The shed thing, I'm okay with, the ADUs
So
are
it
not
is-
allowed,
Right,
correct?
correct,
Okay,
correct. Okay, so
Yep.
storage shed is okay. All right.
And if I could just answer, we're fine with adding the plat note, just reiterating what the easement already says, which is no impediment of the ditch. That doesn't necessarily change anything. It just gives another place for someone to be able to see it, which I think is great. So the more places we have things for people to see, the easier it is for builders, residents, everything. So just taking almost a carbon copy of that easement and putting it onto the plat, we have no issue with that.
Well, we're here. Do you have any plans? Do you have any restrictions against storage units for these?
Well, once we sell the units, I mean, we have asked our homeowners obviously to work within their HOA. There's a greater HOA that also governs that neighborhood,
Yeah.
as well as what the town, of course. We will not be putting any storage units back there. And in conversation with any of our homeowners, no one has mentioned that to me. But I also can't, once I sell it 25 years down the line, I can't guarantee. I don't have my crystal ball here tonight. I apologize.
Like you say, once Habitat sells the structures to the qualified buyers, you're out of picture. You're not.
Correct.
You got on the properties, you have a HOA between the three of you that is how you guys work out any differences between yourselves, but.
Correct. And then how they interact.
Up here needs to understand that. You're not involved.
Yeah, I'm
Correct.
curious where we're going with all this.
Oh, well, I guess one
Just a question.
Right.
Would be fine.
Right, but they can
And-
build a shed. They can't put the shed on top of the drainage ditch.
if I remember correctly, I just got a text message from the president of the Parkside Homeowners Association, says that Parkside Homeowners Association does not allow storage sheds, period. Question answered.
Yeah, they also, because they also order that, which usually has more strict actually than even the town one.
They must be zoomed in.
You just got that?
Yeah, so just since we've gotten there, the town is a completely separate entity than the HOA, and the town does not enforce HOA covenants. We just enforce the town rules, regulations, and ordinances. And so if the HOA does have additional requirements, that's and standards, that's up to them to enforce. So that's outside of, again, that's not a town component.
So it seems to me that whatever restrictions need to be on these lots are already in place.
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
Would that be accurate?
from a town perspective, yes.
Yeah. So do we have any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Well, I've got a question. Will you be building any more in Ridgway?
So our next build is a veteran build in Montrose. And I'm happy to announce we also just bought a very, very large piece of ground in Montrose that we're hoping to use for workforce housing. We would like to build more in Ridgway, but as of right now, I don't have any land. So if anybody has land they'd like to donate or sell to Habitat, I would love to talk to you.
Have you talked to Andrea Sokolowski at the Home Trust? I believe she's got
Yes, she and I are working together, actually meeting with her on Friday,
Great.
get an update from her.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good job.
Good work. We appreciate all your work.
Yes,
So I'm going to now open this to public comment, and it looks like somebody on Zoom has a hand up.
Yeah, that's, if that's me, I have a hand up. This is Dan Quigley, engineer, with Buckhorn Engineering up in Montrose here. We were Dowell at the time that these plans were done. I just wanted to address the question from one of the commissioners regarding, sheet C5. The reference to SF was a temporary erosion control plan for construction to limit sedimentation so that it didn't leave the site. That SF refers to silt fence. And that, of course, will be removed once the construction is complete. So it's not a permanent fence. It's the black silt fence that you see on construction sites to limit sedimentation.
Thanks, Dan. That's very
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
There's another hand up,
Jennifer Cran.
Jennifer Cran.
Hi, so I wrote a letter and I'm just gonna paraphrase that, and then also from listening to discussion, have some other concerns or whatever. I guess initially I wrote the letter about why is this being done at this point versus at the beginning. It sounds like everyone's saying it was a mistake. I guess I was wondering, would it have been permitted at the beginning or not? And would any construction items have been different if they'd started with 3 separate lots in the same attached style, like firewalls or roofing or anything like that?
Jennifer, I wouldn't describe it as a mistake, it's more of an oversight. And as TJ mentioned earlier, technically, under the current code, it should have been done at the beginning, but I don't think there's any problem with it being done now. That project was definitely built with this eventual configuration that we're potentially approving tonight as the way to go. So I don't think there would have been any difference in the construction or anything. It's not the way we intended it for it to happen, but a lot of different circumstances conspired to leave us where we are tonight.
Okay, so somewhat related to that, it seems like some requests to divide up condos and solar ranch into townhomes have been denied. Is that because of the plat notes or?
That's because Solar Ranch's plat is totally different than the plat here. This lot has been designated as a triplex the entire time, ever since it was platted.
Okay. And then I had a question, the current landscape, it's just rocks. I gather that they're going to be, from the presentation, that there's some requirement about trees and shrubs, and so, but if they sell it, people are buying something with rocks, are they going to know, well, you have to put a tree in or something?
If you downloaded the packet, you'd see there's an elaborate landscaping plan, and as the director of Habitat just said, that they can't install the landscape now. The ground's frozen, the plants wouldn't survive. So there's going to be extensive landscaping done in the spring, and it's all
Tried to download the landscape packet, but it's 300 and some, or the packet is 300 and some pages. So I guess you're just saying it's going to be done, and I walked by it and it just looks like a bunch of rocks. So I'm wondering. And then I wanted to make a comment about the fences, somewhat related. I don't know if there's room in the back. This is 3 things. If on the sides build a fence, will the person in the middle be able to get into the back? Is there access to the back that for the person in the middle? I don't really understand that. And if they build a fence in the front, again, the front yards are, this is very small. The whole lot is very small. It's close to the street. There's a fairly, like if you can build a fence in Ridgway around the front of your lot, and it can be 6 foot tall, but I think it's within 20 feet of the street. You have to, it has to be mesh for the top 2 feet. So that would apply too. So
They will be held to whatever standards the town has for fencing on those lots.
Or the HOA.
or the HOA if it's stricter.
And they just said, put a building fence in.
Well, the owners always could. Are there, do you have any other comments, Jennifer?
I guess I had the question, if somebody wanted to put something in the back, or if the people put something in the back, can the middle person get to the back other than through their house?
We don't, thank you for your questions. We don't answer questions during public comment, and that I'm sure the owners are going to figure that out.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Is anyone else on Zoom with a public comment? And anyone in the audience here have a public comment on this subdivision? Can you come up to the podium and just state your name and address, please?
My name is Nicole Gook, and I live with my parents while I'm waiting for the home to be done. So 171 South Cora, Ridgway, Colorado. And I guess I just wanted to comment on the fencing. I'm one of the prospective home buyers, and I'd like everyone to know that I'm just really interested in being able to have a fence. I have a daughter with special needs, and we need to keep her safe in the backyard. We have a big ditch outside, not the one that's everyone's concerned with, but the one that actually has water in it. And I would like to keep that contained from her. I also have a 2-year-old, so I wouldn't want her to drown either. And then as far as where the fencing goes in the back, I know people are concerned about impeding the flow of water, and we're very aware of that. I'm in the middle unit, and I have the smallest yard of anybody, so I'd like to try to maintain as much of that as possible. And make the comment that if we are not allowed to put the fence up against the property line in the future, if we do, who's to maintain that ditch? Whose responsibility is that? Is it ours because we're paying for it? It's our property, but how do we maintain it then? And if other homeowners are draining their, I guess, crawl space water onto that, is that allowed? So those are just the concerns I have as a future homeowner. And that's it.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment?
Tom here from 405 Kismet. So I'm neighbor to the east, and I guess mainly what I want to comment about is that my wife and I are thrilled that Habitat has built that place. We think they've done a fantastic job. And, I don't see, this is a legal situation, but I don't see they own the land. So I don't see if they want to, why they couldn't build right on the property line. The main concern that we have as neighbors is just that we have access to that. And all that requires is we have a heated hose that goes over there now. And that's all we need, that's basically our position. And I don't see, is there any legal reason why they couldn't put it on the property line? I mean, it's their property. See, the easement ditch is, like 3 feet away from the property line. And so I don't see why they couldn't build it if they wanted to.
So we can't actually answer that question. I don't know that we even have that information, but my question to staff is, where would the property owners get this information? They could set up a meeting with the town?
The plat's right here. There's a 10-foot drainage easement at the back of that lot that goes from the eastern property line to the into the lot on the west. It's 10 foot wide. The ditch is probably in the center of that, as you said, but there's a 10-foot easement there. But I've built fences before that don't block water flow, so they'd have to get with it.
Yeah, and it wouldn't impede water flow. I know that. Yeah. Okay, that's all I got.
So our understanding is the fence just can't block water flow.
That's correct.
And the
That's my
town
understanding.
building department could help them further define that when they were ready to put up a fence.
Certainly could, and the existing plat identifies that ditch as a drainage easement, covered that. And there's a plat note within it that says it's the HOA's responsibility to maintain it, something to that effect. Okay, so again, it's not the town's ditch. Certainly can be available to assist and have been available to assist as we further navigate the fence issue. Right?
So it's fair to say that this ditch, these fences and this maintenance is all an HOA problem?
Somewhat.
So, yeah, not entirely, but some.
So that would be the first place to go for answers is the HOA,
Yeah,
maybe.
For some of it, but yeah, it's not a simple answer, but
Okay,
It seems to me like the big issue is that the fence, if you build a fence either, well, not even either, if you build a fence across the drainage easement, it can impede the drainage. So it ceases to serve its purpose to keep pets and children in the yard. So the only way to have an efficient fence that keeps pets and children in the yard is to build it on the house side of the ditch. And that you could do without question.
Yeah.
The edge of the easement, not the property. Does that make sense?
and if I can piggyback on that, the more I think about it, if you build the fence to the property line, you impede the ability of the HOA or whoever's tasked with maintaining that easement from accessing the ditch and being able to maintain it actively. So I'm not an attorney, I like to play one on TV, but I would suspect that wouldn't be allowable.
Yeah, it seems like the best place, if the property owner wants to build a fence that completely encloses their backyard, it needs to be at the house side of the drainage easement, not at the property. Which makes for a smaller yard, unfortunately, but.
No headaches.
That's true.
TJ, did you want to say something?
If I may.
Please.
I'm trying to, this is a really good conversation. I think what I want to say is that I think where it's all going is that none of us, as mentioned, have that crystal ball. And so all we're really asking, I think, in our conversation with both property of the adjacent property owners, Habitat, and future homeowners, is before somebody does something out there, let's just make sure we have a conversation. So from our standpoint and your standpoint, as you sit up there this evening, what can we do? Think about it this way. What can we do? What can you all do to make sure that whoever wants to do that, and assuming that they're doing, right by everybody else, right? Not trying to be negligent or problematic. How do we make sure that that individual or that family knows how to go about doing this the proper way? And that's where the platinum comes. So again, it's a conversation that's going to have to be had at a future date. We can't solve for it right now. If we do, we're going to probably create some headache for somebody. So that's all I would just suggest.
Think we could address that in the motion itself?
I don't think that, if I'm understanding the question, can you require somebody to talk to somebody in the future?
No, just make a motion saying no fences on the drain.
If it's on the platinum.
Yeah, I mean, you could, right? So
Just reiterate it.
to kind of reiterate again, right?
That's what I was suggesting.
Yeah,
The
that's
way
what I
that
was
it
thinking.
reads, the way the code reads right now, they could build a fence to the property line, as long as they don't impede the flow. And I know that's somewhat contradictory because as we talked about, we're probably going to. So if you also decide, you could put the note on there that says you cannot put it within the easement. That could be a motion, that could be a condition to add that note, if so desired.
TJ, just a quick question, for you. Isn't that 10-foot easement designed to be able to bring in, equipment, like large equipment if necessary? In which case, if you built to the property, or you built your fence at the property line, that would be impeding not the flow of water, but the ability to get maintenance.
That's what Preston was saying.
Yeah.
That's exactly what
Yes.
Preston was saying.
But none of this seems like planning stuff. This seems like it should have been on the plat notes on the property. on the lot.
It is. The only reason that Jack and I are suggesting that maybe it be an additional plat note on here is just for clarification, just so that future property owners are aware of it instead of having to dig through the code to find it. That's my, it doesn't have to be there. It's not required. It's just.
But if it's a plat note, isn't it on the map that they get when they buy their property?
Correct.
Isn't that what a plat note is? Like everybody gets a little map when they close on their property and the notes put on there, you're not digging anywhere, you receive them.
Well, it's not that clear. I mean, the plat shows the easement, but the plat doesn't show who maintains that easement. You have to read the HOA documents to see who maintains it. So what we're saying here is it would be probably smart to re-clarify it again and
Put it
reiterate.
on this plat, because the future property owner might not see the entire HOA plat. The entire subdivision.
I think that,
I'm open to the change.
I mean, as long as it doesn't put any further restrictions on the property than what are already there, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. That's my problem with this, is I don't want to put any further restrictions.
It's just.
I think I do. My concern here is if you take the build the fence that John's.
Excuse me if I may just interrupt real quick. We still have the public hearing open. So if we're starting to have a deliberation up in the dais, we
Okay.
might want to make sure there's.
Does
no other
anyone else want to
conversation.
comment on this?
Close it.
I gotta put on my 2 cents.
Okay,
Sorry to interrupt you.
Thank you.
sorry. So my name is Trace Seal and we came before this board a year and a half ago and got approval to do a similar process right across the street. So we're the neighbors to the west. And as far as the fence goes, I think we're way off on a tangent, but I'm going to add more to it. I've seen other properties in the neighborhood there where they've left the fence 10 feet off the property line and left a corridor. I think that's a great solution. And I know that you don't want to add anything to the plat notes, but there's going to be some communication with the Habitat for Humanity. Maybe they could just build that fence that's 10 feet. Maybe you could come to an agreement that they build that fence that's 10 feet off. So it's an existing solution. That's my 2 cents on that. I'm done with that. But as far as the amendment and the variances, I've watched Elvina work on this project for the last, I don't know, over 2 years. I've seen the homeowners come in and do their community service. I've seen volunteers, not their community service, but their volunteer hours. I've seen volunteers come and work on this project. These guys are just so deserving to move into these homes, and we need to do everything we can to get them into their homes.
Thank you.
Can't lose sight of that. That's a good point. Thank you.
That's the easy part.
Maybe.
Okay, is there any more public comment? I will close the public comment now.
Yeah, and I'll just right away say, I don't think there's any disagreement up here on passing the necessary motions to move this project forward based on TJ's presentation and the facts at hand. The fence is just, it's an unfortunate kind of additional confusing mess. Therese has an interesting potential solution. My guess is you're not interested in spending the money to build another fence in the next however many, and plus the ground's frozen, and it's like, you guys want to finish the project, sell it to these guys, and everybody's done and moved in and happy. So while I agree that your solution makes sense in some ways, probably not this time of year. So
I understand, but landscape has to be completed anyway.
yeah, so what it boils down to me, all this fence discussion is, yes, there are plat notes, there is HOA docs, there are things that explain that a property owner can't build in that drainage easement or plant or do anything to obstruct that drainage easement. But it doesn't say that on this plat. And what I'm suggesting, and I won't speak for Jack, is that we just, part of our motion tonight, we say, let's add an additional very short, sweet plat note that says property owners need to be aware that they can't obstruct the drainage easement.
I agree with
Fences or any other.
I agree with
I think that's fine. Otherwise, we're gonna see somebody in here applying for a variance for their fence that they already built. Yes, because they didn't know.
I think we forgot to call on Dorla for
I mean,
So I think we're good.
yeah,
Are you prepared to make a motion?
I can be. Unless that's somebody else is dying to do it.
Unless someone else is ready.
I'd like to talk about it. I mean, I thought you had more. I want to talk about that. My concern is that one homeowner builds across the ditch, and the other one doesn't, and the third one doesn't. We have a hopscotch fence effect. That would be a disaster. My concern is that if they build to the western side of the easement, it's more consistent, and that ditch is going to have to be maintained. It's been there for 15 years, hasn't been maintained yet, but as the neighborhood fills up, there's going to be weeds back there, there's going to be mice back there, there's going to be all kinds of stuff back there. So it's going to have to be maintained. So that's another concern about the fence. So I think having John's opinion of having part of this approval, that being west of the ranges, this becomes even more important.
Is anyone prepared to make a motion?
We've got at least 4 motions to make, right?
If I may just real quick, just if I want to kind of separate some of these out. I think if there's some concerns or comments or additional condition on the fence, that should apply to the flat motion.
The
not
fourth,
necessarily
the
variance.
fourth one,
Correct.
yes,
Just to be clear that it doesn't need to be carried throughout
right.
all of them.
I think I'm gonna make the motion, because I think I can.
Okay, go for it.
I move to approve an 8-foot variance to allow 0-foot side setback on the south property line for lot 15A, amended plat of lot 15 Parkside subdivision in the R low density residential district, finding that the criteria set forth in section 7-3-21 of the RMC have been met with the following conditions. 1, address all comments in the planning review comment letter dated January 6, 2023 to the satisfaction of town staff prior to the amended plat being recorded with the Ridgway County Clerk and Recorder. 2, the Ridgway Town Council approves the amended plat of lot 15 Parkside subdivision.
Second. Oh, we all seconded. Pick your winner.
John. And then will we vote on each one of these individually, or can we do it as at the end? Each one individually. So could we have oh yeah, all in favor? The motion passes unanimously. Ask what?
You could ask, are there any?
Oh, I thought last time I said that you told me not to. Okay, I move to approve an 8-foot variance to allow 0 side setback on the north and south property lines for lot 15B, amended plat of the lot 15 Parkside subdivision in the R low density residential district, finding that the criteria set forth in section 7-3-21 of the RMC have been met with the following conditions. 1, address all comments in the planning review comment letter dated January 6, 23 to the satisfaction of the town staff prior to the amended plat being recorded with the Ridgway County Clerk and Recorder. 2, the Ridgway Town Council approves the amended plat of lot 15 Parkside subdivision.
Second.
Russ seconded it.
Very good.
And can we get, all those in favor? Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously.
I move to approve an 8-foot variance to allow 0 side setback on the north property lines for lot 15C, amended plat of lot 15, Parkside subdivision in the R low density residential district, finding that the criteria set forth in section 7-3-21 of the RMC have been met in the following condition and with the following conditions. Address all comments in the planning review comment letter dated January 6, 2023 to the satisfaction of town staff prior to the amended plat being recorded with the Ridgway County Clerk and Recorder. 2, the Ridgway Town Council approves the amended plat of lot 15 Parkside subdivision.
Second. Jennifer Franz, seconded. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously. There's one more.
I move to recommend approval of amended plat of lot 15 Parkside subdivision in the town of Ridgway to the town of Ridgway County Council, subject to the conditions below, finding that the criteria set forth in 7-4-5 and 7-4-10 of the Ridgway Municipal Code have been met and with the following conditions. One, address all comments in the planning review comment letter dated January 6, 2023. And two, add an additional plat note pointing out that there can be no construction nor plants planted into the drainage easement on the east side of these properties, and leaving it up to staff and town attorney to make sure that's worded as appropriate. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously.
Great, thanks everybody.
Good job, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can see you guys move in. Are we gonna have a moving in ceremony or some sort of
Yes.
party?
So our next meeting at town hall is our last and final hurdle. So once I know that we're all good there, then we'll have a date for a total ceremony. And that will be invite only, but we will make sure. Well.
Great, thank you. Thanks for coming.
When you go upstairs.
What's that?
Take your shoes off when you go upstairs on the carpet.
We will.
They're beautiful units. I just-
Bet you guys.
Thank
can't
you
wait.
all.
Good night.
Do we need to take a brief breather before we launch into this, what we're all really here for? All right. We'll take 3 minutes, back at 6:41. Hope there's not a line, John. Make it quick.
I always speak with kids.
Yeah.
And I'm perfect.
They are.
Big ass fish. But deep sea fishing in Mexico has been terribly. Strangers.
First, but. So. Yeah.
Oh.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah.
So how does that work? You go.
I didn't want to talk about that. Should that, So Preston, it looks like we've got a few developers.
Yeah, that's very.
You got 1 minute.
Not leaving yet.
Express.
An espresso. That's a big concern.
Right.
That's just.
We won't hit.
Yeah, so I have a. Yeah. So we do it all.
Oh, wow.
I said this one doesn't.
Still ask, you know, how many.
Perfect.
It says 20.
It's really fun. And. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, John's law, it says there. Too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Significantly too late.
Well, I think we're all.
He's one of those people who. He's got. Everybody needs. And if I'm one of those people. I think we should write in. It's with the trash.
So originally when you did the dishwasher, you put the whole dishwasher in there.
Okay.
All right, folks, back at it. All right, back to order. Let's see, let me get back to my agenda here. We've got a work session, which is an update from staff regarding updates to RMC Chapter 7, Planning and Zoning, excuse me. And I will turn that back over to TJ.
Excellent. Well, really excited to, Katie is actually going to be driving this. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to make it here this evening too, but she's there online, and I'm going to turn it on over to her for the presentation.
Welcome, Katie. Thank you.
Thanks. Good to see you all, even if it's virtually. So, okay. Is the PowerPoint up okay for you guys on your screen?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. All right. So, objective of tonight's discussion, I know we tried to really fine tune what we were going to talk about to make sure we keep it more to helping to explain the scenario process. But what we also really wanted to do was give you kind of a brief feedback of the kind of overview of what we received from you and town staff of your review of the red line versions that we gave you around the end of November. And so we're going to give you kind of a general overview to some of the more questions that more people asked that we wanted to make sure everybody understood. And then we're also going to review development scenarios and explain the application processes proposed. I think this is kind of the biggest part of the meeting, and what everyone is most anticipating is trying to really help you understand what we're proposing and what an application would have to go through when they submit it, and what type of applications we have and how that process flows. So that'll be the main chunk of the meeting. And then obviously, as always, we'll end with questions and discussion. I am happy to take any questions that we receive from you during it. If I'm not making sense, especially on the scenario parts, and you have more detailed questions you want me to explain, please feel free just to yell out or let me know. So with that said, I want to jump right into the feedback received from planning commissioners and town staff. Obviously, we received a lot of great feedback, and I'm not answering every single question here. And the reason is because a lot of your questions and thoughts, we were able to just take, and we're putting it right into the code, clarifying things that you brought up, maybe had some discrepancies or didn't make a lot of sense. We're also thinking that after discussing the scenarios and processes tonight, some of your questions are actually going to come together a little bit better, and they'll make sense to you without us having to actually put them on a slide to answer. So again, if you feel like at the end of this presentation, your questions are still not being answered, please let TJ and/or I know, and we are happy to help you out a little bit more and make sure we're all on track and on the same page with everything. So before I go any further, the most important thing I want to say is thank you. I really appreciated the feedback, and even those of you who acknowledged you didn't have a lot of questions or feedback, I still know you took the time to read it. to not have those questions. So I know it was a lot to get through, and I do really want to say thank you, and I appreciate all of your thoughts. There are some good catches too that I chuckled at that I missed, and I like when people catch those little things. So thank you for that. So starting right off, one of our biggest questions was some clarification on the plan unit developments and trying to understand a little bit better. Are they a zone district or are they a subdivision? And the answer is they are a zone district classification. So when an applicant comes in with a PUD, you're basically getting two components: a development plan, which is a proposed layout of the site, kind of a conceptual plan. And you're also getting a development guide, which is more of a narrative stating the modifications to the underlying zone district. So those kind of modifications that could be proposed and reviewed by the town on a PUD, a lot of them are dimensional standards. I won't state and read the whole list to you, but the biggest thing to note is a PUD is basically a zoning overlay. So there's kind of an image here, and I know it's a little bit tough to see, but you can see green hash marks. This is another town zone map. The yellow is a zone district, residential. The pink is a commercial zone district. And then you can see there's these green lines. And that ties into what is known as number 9 for this One River Pines PUD. So it's on the official zoning map. The town planner or anybody looking to develop in that area knows that they have a PUD document to look at. And they also know that if they don't see something in that PUD document, it's going to follow those underlying zone districts, which is either in this case, the yellow or the pink. So hopefully that clarifies the PUD a little bit better, in kind of explaining how it's a zone district and not a subdivision development. So next one, a couple of you had questions on manufactured homes, mobile homes, travel homes. I'm not going to review all the definitions for this, but TJ and TJ, I don't know how he knows as much as he does about these definitions, but he rattled them all off on his head, and we are going to be clarifying them in the code. And so all the definitions will be clear for what is what, along with what standards would have to be met for each classification that is going to be within Ridgway. The biggest thing that I will note without reading definitions to you is that the definitions are primarily tied to one of two things. It could come down to when the unit was constructed, but the primary one is what entity it's permitted through, whether it's permitted through HUD or whether it's building permitted through the Town of Ridgway Building Department in the International Building Code. So a couple of you had questions, so I did want to acknowledge that we are going to clarify those definitions so that they make more sense to everybody and everyone knows how those will read through in the code. Okay, next one, administrative adjustments. We had proposed a 10% adjustment, and this was a really great question that somebody asked of why 10%. The answer is there's no scientific method to it. 10% tends to be the normal that people use. It gives the town a little bit of leniency to potentially grant to an applicant for usually a dimensional setback reduction, such as, let's say, a front setback, but it's not giving them so much that it's going to impact a side. Let's say somebody was requesting an administrative adjustment for a setback on the side property line. You don't want to give them so much that you may be kind of prohibiting some or causing the neighbors to maybe not like that you're allowing an encroachment closer to their property line. So 10% tends to just kind of give you that middle ground. You can potentially give a little bit of flexibility if there's a really justified case, but you're not giving a humongous out there percentage like 50% to a setback reduction. With that said, we are happy to take any input. It does not need to be 10%. That was just kind of the standard number used in a lot of communities. And example of that, your largest setback in town is 15 foot. So somebody could potentially request up to a 1.5 foot setback. Instead of being 15 foot, they could propose 13.5 feet from that property line. And again, there's the criteria and standards to look at. When this is commonly used, there are two scenarios are most common. One, if you have some environmental features such as floodplain on the property, you could sometimes allow someone to build a little bit closer to a setback to help limit the disturbance to that environmental factor. And then the other way that a time that the administrative adjustment is sometimes used is if you have very small lots. then, and sometimes it's hard to put on a dwelling unit that's going to be functional necessarily, depending on the lot sizes and the density, things like that, that may be when flexibility may come in to be requested. But again, no set scientific reasoning for that 10%.
So I've got a question about that. So that's, I guess, obviously 10% of whatever you're requesting the variance for. So you're using side setback, but it also could be house size, it could be lot size, it could be whatever you're requesting to be 10% of that number.
Correct. There are certain things you wouldn't be able to request it for. They'd be outlined in the code, but you could potentially have it for height, setbacks, your dimensional requirements, primarily lot coverage. Correct.
And just to build on that a little bit, it could be, we could certainly add an intro, an intent, and exceptions, right? Things that the administrative adjustment could be for or is not for, right? It's an option, if you will.
So to clarify, administrative adjustment is something that a developer could come to town staff for and wouldn't have to come to the planning commission.
That is correct.
Or builder. Or building, not probably.
I gotta say, I hadn't thought about this, but the 10% on a height variance, I'm not sure I'd be comfortable with that. That's a potential bigger number.
So you're saying that like it's a 30-foot height variance that could give them an extra 3 feet?
32 foot variance for the height, so
Yeah, I think we need to,
So that might be on the list of things that aren't allowed in an administrative adjustment.
I think we would say that height variances aren't allowed to be dealt with administratively.
I think that's great. And then I'll also know, hearing that and that there may be other discussion on it, we do have a list of items to still kind of discuss with Planning Commission at another meeting date, hopefully, to fine tune as we move forward. So I think what I'll do, if it works for you, is I'll also add this to the list so we can take what you just said regarding height, we'll fine tune that part section and then maybe bring it up for another discussion, but I didn't want to focus. Sorry with you, I don't want to focus too much on it tonight when we have kind of rolling through other scenarios and things too.
It almost looks like a rabbit hole that we might follow.
If I may, just to kind of, because I think there are probably others as well, maybe Katie, what we could do is just put together a table. And you know, at least we put the dimensional standards and then what 10% could be, and then we say yes, yes, no, 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 or this needs to be. There's a lot of flexibility in it, but I certainly understand.
But I like the idea of having
So,
an administrative adjustment.
correct. So my concern is that I think there might be other times when more than 10% is appropriate, like a 3-foot side setback.
Then they will come to the planning commission.
Well, I think it'll display itself in this table of stuff. We'll see it better if there's places that might be appropriate for more than 10%. So I think it's a great idea.
Great, thank you. All right, we'll move forward with kind of creating a table and bringing that back for some further discussion for you. All right, moving on, next topic here with kind of general questions. Who is the decision maker on site plans? Excellent job to you. I forget who found it, but we did have a discrepancy in the table had a different answer than the narrative. And the reason is we actually are not completely sure yet. Staff CPS we recommend administrative. After feedback we heard, we think it's probably going to bump up to a little bit higher review than administrative. So at this point, there's not a clear answer. We would say we understand why maybe the planning commission would want to review site plan. And I think as we go through the scenarios, you'll have some feedback that you'll be able to give us on this question. I do want to say the reason why we frequently will recommend more of a administrative review or approval of site plans is if your code is written clearly, you have very clear standards, and a site plan is it needs to meet all of those standards. So you have staff looking at a site plan saying, basically going through the check boxes of the entire code. Does it meet parking? Does it have the right amount of parking spaces? What about fence height? Things like that. There's not much to discuss because it either meets it or it doesn't meet it. And if it doesn't meet it, it's not going to go through and be approved. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind as we go through the site plan review process tonight and bring that up into a couple of the scenarios that we have, is just kind of remember site plans, they need to meet the standards unless they're going to apply for a variance and or an administrative adjustment like we just spoke about. And I'll explain that a little bit more as we go, but excellent catch to the person who caught the discrepancy in the language and the table. And the answer is we don't know yet. So we're going to finalize that obviously in the next month, hopefully. And it may be another discussion we bring back to you to talk about. Okay, then the other kind of bigger topic, this wasn't necessarily a construction conversation or question brought up by commissioners, but it came from a lot of discussions with town staff. And that is regarding construction drawings and infrastructure improvements. So when we came before you in November, the end of November, we had kind of proposed a twist to the process. We tried to streamline it a little bit. But after talking with town staff, we realized that that's really not the approach that Ridgway necessarily wants to take. So we are taking a step back and we're actually decided to continue with the process regarding construction drawings and infrastructure improvements, the timelines and when they'd be completed and submitted and completed. We're looking at back to the standard practice that has been done in Ridgway over the past. So we'll get into that a little bit through the scenarios again, but I wanted to note it because this is something different than what you saw on November 29th. November 29th, we proposed a new process. We're going back to what has been historically been used as the standard practice in Ridgway.
So the planning commission get to weigh in on that, or that was a staff decision?
Obviously your feedback is definitely welcome and I think staff will listen to it. I don't know if Preston wants to weigh in a little bit on to what extent we would allow wiggle room or discuss, but obviously the code amendments come down to planning commission and town council's final decisions and votes and thoughts. So I will, before we go too far in that, I'll also explain kind of what that process is. The existing one that you have, sorry, I'm going to the bottom of the screen first. The subdivision application, what has been historically done and what we're proposing will continue, will be construction plans submitted with the preliminary plat application. So basically someone submits a sketch plan, then a preliminary plat, they provide the construction drawings. They then have a pre-construction meeting with town staff, town engineer. They begin the infrastructure improvements. And then they come in for that final plat. The site plan process, because it's a new process, based on feedback from town staff, where we've put the construction drawing submittal along with the development agreement, because we know that's extremely important to the town, is with the site plan submittal. So a developer, an applicant would submit a site plan. That application is going to have to, the way proposed right now, include construction drawings and a development agreement. Then they'll move forward, if approved, to the pre-construction meeting. Infrastructure improvements will occur and then the building permit. So still kind of bringing those technical documents at the beginning of the process as has been historically done in the past.
Katie, can I just jump in real quick, just to provide a little bit more context? That what we, through additional conversations, right? You all remember we suggested shuffling that around, essentially getting through the planning process and then doing construction documents after the final plat and tying it all to an SIA, subdivision improvement agreement. Upon discussion, that doesn't necessarily fit with the historic use in Ridgway of that process. And excuse me, gosh, I got something in my throat. Katie and I were convinced that doesn't necessarily fit in Ridgway, the standard way that we were using earlier. What we are doing though is clarifying what's submitted when and what can be done at what point. So we're still moving ahead in that direction, but the idea that construction documents are done prior to final platting, I think that's the component that we do feel is consistent with the character and nature of Ridgway through discussion. And we're more than happy to talk more about that, but that's why that changed. reversion back to existing, if you will. But we are still going to clarify it, and I think it'll be a lot cleaner for the development community.
What was,
Understanding what the expectations
what was
are.
the benefit of how you had proposed it?
The benefit, if you will, was that lots were going to be more able to be sold prior to infrastructure being installed. Okay. You could sell a lot prior to building a road, prior to installing water and sewer. After talking through it with staff, Preston, Joanne, Bo, that we feel that that is for a real reason. Many years ago, the town has been burnt on those. And so the other part is that previously SIA, subdivision improvement agreements, have been relied heavily upon in areas where you have it the other way, where you have sellable lots and then infrastructure. So really now what you're doing is putting the onus on the developer to make those improvements and taking the town out of that process.
Does the way that you proposed it work in other places?
Yes. Yeah.
So I thought,
Yeah, it's been working here.
I thought the idea was to, we're updating things here, so that, does that hold us back from updating, or, you know what I mean? Like kind of a progressive, trying to be more. I just don't fully understand it, and I remember it coming up when we discussed it before, and I was, and Preston had said, you know, we'll need to discuss it with the other town staff, and I was just concerned that it was a setback to not do that.
So let me jump in. So I don't view it as a setback. That's my personal opinion. Staff collectively has discussed this at length. It's been a very thoughtful process. So what's here and what Katie kind of laid out and TJ was building upon is staff's recommendation. TJ just cited all the reasons for it that collectively, myself, Joanne, Bo, TJ were involved, Katie was in that meeting, why the preference at the staff level is the way Ridgway has been approaching the process over the years. So again, TJ kind of just laid that out. And I would all certainly have the prerogative to provide your 2 cents and your thoughts on that. Ultimately, it's a town council decision. So just be clear.
And I think we'll understand a lot more when we go through the scenarios of that difference. We can talk about how it might be different between the two. So
Okay.
is that okay? Sorry, Katie.
No, you're good. And thank you for jumping in. And TJ is absolutely correct. Like a big part of our focus is even with this process, we can make it a lot more easier to understand in the code. And that will just solve a lot of problems when we have things clearly written out. And that is what we're working on. So I think it'll all come together pretty well as everything moves forward. Okay, so last thing before we get into the scenarios, I did want to note that we had a good question about, has the town attorney signed off on all of these? We are still having discussions with the town manager, town attorney, town engineer. Nobody has signed off on the proposed changes at this time. Staff is still working through, we're redlining things for you to review and also the town attorney to review still. So nothing at this point in time has been officially approved. And that is not in connection to what we're just talking about. It's just in connection to the entire, all the code revisions, all the chapters that we've provided to you. They have not been officially signed off on yet.
But they're doing a great job.
It's a lot for staff to get through also, as you know, from when you had to get through it. So, okay, so scenarios discussion. TJ was great on bringing in some scenarios that he has worked with you with on applications. We want to be really clear that whereas some of these scenarios are based on real actual projects, and we even have the heading of the name of the project on them, we're not talking about the merits of the project because some of them are not completely done. We are just using these to demonstrate really clear examples that you're familiar with to show how the process will go through. So no speaking about the actual applications, what you think of the application itself, we're just talking about the process. And so we just want to make that really clear for you as we go through this tonight. All right. Okay, very brief review on before I get into the first scenario on general review procedures. This is a slide you actually saw back in November, and you kind of read through this process as you read through the code. Basically, for zoning, for subdivisions, and for PUDs, we have a very general review procedure. And then, as you know, as you get into specific application types, it gets a lot more detailed and the standards are brought in. But instead of reviewing this with every single scenario, I wanted to just kind of refresh your heads as we go through this of what your general review procedure will be for pretty much all applications. So all applications are going to start with a pre-application meeting with staff. Sometimes this is optional. It's always recommended. Application submittal requirements, you're going to have checklists of what has to get submitted. Staff will go through that checklist and they'll do a completeness check, and that will check off the boxes to make sure everything has been submitted. Then we'll kick it off into a referral period, which will go to the referral agencies that are relevant. There was a little bit of confusion because we had a long list proposed in the code. That list is not who everybody will not on that list will not receive every application. Only the relevant agencies or departments will receive it. So if it's not on a CDOT highway with access proposed, it's not going to go to CDOT. So the referral agencies could be a very tiny group, or if it's a project that impacts all the utility companies, CDOT, federal agencies, it's going to go out for referral to all of those agencies and departments. After those comments are in, the applicant will work to address any outstanding concerns. And at that point, staff is writing the staff report. We notice the hearing or the meeting if it's required in the code. And as you also remember, we have our nice clean cut table that will show what is noticed and how. And then you'll have your public hearings, and then we have the post-approval process, which includes things such as recording a plat or recording a subdivision improvements agreement, development agreements, things like that. So very general process spelled out here, but I didn't want to go over it every single time in every scenario. So just kind of keep that in your head. And again, feel free to interrupt as I go through the scenarios. If I'm going too fast or skipping through some of this, and you want a reminder on what those processes are.
I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
On the referral process, who makes the decision on who refers to what agency?
Town staff would.
Okay, and then is it going to be a requirement that the submitting party, whether it be a builder or developer, meet the feedback from that submittal?
Correct. If there's an outstanding concern, it would have to be corrected. Now, sometimes the concerns don't need to be corrected prior to coming before the planning commission and or town council. They may be conditions of approval that are incorporated in as suggested conditions with a motion. But if there are clear things that aren't going to show that the project will not work without complying with that comment brought up, staff will require the applicant to address that concern prior to moving forward to the planning commission or town council. A lot of times referral comments tend to be more long-term with the projects, and a lot of times they're added as a special condition. And so you're not holding up an applicant for something that they can't take care of yet, but they may need to take care of prior to recording a plat, for example.
Can I just add that, and I mentioned this in my comments, in all the years I've been involved in this, completeness review has always been an issue. And anything we can do to tighten up the completeness review process and make sure that applicants are sent back to the drawing board if their applications are not complete. Because for way too many years, we've been dealing with applications that simply aren't complete, and that just shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, and we agree with you. So hopefully all that will be clear. And that's the biggest thing. It's just making sure everyone on both sides or all three sides and every direction knows exactly what is going to get submitted. And that's why that pre-application meeting, even if the code doesn't require it, we always recommend it because it just gets everybody on track with what they're going to have to provide. So
yeah, I like that.
Like a checklist to make a big difference too.
Correct. Yeah. So great comment. All right, any other questions on the general review procedures? Okay. All right, I'm building up, kind of trying to go easy to more difficult on these scenarios. So the first scenario that we put together for you is a traditional residential subdivision. I'm gonna kind of go a little bit quick on this because it's basically a process that you're familiar with, and we want to get into more some of the scenarios that have more applications involved. But we did want to make sure we hit the basic ones also, and especially with developers being interested in wanting to understand the process, we just want to make sure everyone is aware of everything that we're proposing.
Hey, Katie,
So-
just,
yeah.
sorry, just real quick, I want to point out that the town noticed, might be a strong word, but at least invited and published this discussion this evening as a public meeting. And I know there's a lot of people on Zoom. There's a few people here, 4 people here in the audience. We're hoping that the development community is participating in this as well. So we also invite those in the audience as well as those in Roomland to participate as well. This is not just a town process. Obviously, it's a partnership with the development community. So I just wanted to point out that they were invited to this meeting and some of them are here to participate as well.
And can they voice comments and concerns during the process?
I would think so, yeah. We have a work session, so I think Chair would still go through you, right? Someone on Zoom, raise your hand. Someone in the audience, raise your hand. Call on and we'll facilitate the discussion that way, but yes.
And you'll let me know if someone on Zoom raised their hand question?
Yep.
Sorry, Katie, just wanted to clarify that.
No,
Thanks.
great. Thank you. Okay, so scenario A, traditional residential subdivision. This would be taking, let's just say, for example, a 30-acre vacant parcel of land. Developer comes in, they want to subdivide that and be able to sell off lots that will each contain a single family residence on it. The roads and infrastructure, the final product will be dedicated to the town with this development scenario. And all the proposed use being single family residences and all dimensional standards, height, setbacks, things like that are all going to comply with the zone district that it's within. So this is a scenario looking at a very simple vacant piece of land, put it into single family residences, and then dedicate the public roads and infrastructure. With this plan, through our process, the applicant is going to start with your sketch plan, which is the first step to a subdivision application process. After it goes through a sketch plan, it's going to go to the preliminary plat. At the preliminary plat stage, construction documents will be submitted, as will the subdivision improvements agreement for the town to start taking a look at. Assuming the preliminary plat is approved, it's going to move forward to where the developer will start constructing public improvements. There's obviously the meetings that occur between the approval of the preliminary plat and construction. They have the pre-construction meeting with the town engineer and those other ones that are listed in the code that have always been done. As that goes through construction of public improvements, then the applicant can come in, they will do a final plat. That will be what creates those lots officially when approved. And then it goes into the building permit status. The chart that you have on here is basically where we put this on for each scenario. It just is a reminder of, sorry, I should have said this first, but pre-application meetings, what's required, what's optional, and as you go through the steps. So this is just copied out of the tables that are provided in the code. As a refresher, there's a table in zoning, a table in subdivision, and a table in PUDs. We combined them all for these exercises tonight. So, but you can see how things would go through. So very simple scenario. I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on this one. Is there any questions before I move on to the ones that are going to get a little bit more complicated? Okay, so I'm going to keep going here. Scenario B, now you're looking at a large scale apartment complex that could be proposed. So here you have a 10-acre parcel under one ownership. The units are going to be rented, they're not going to be sold. Therefore, by not selling them and already having a legal parcel that has been legally subdivided in the past, no subdivision is going to be required for this. The applicant is proposing that the use of the apartment complex, multifamily, is going to comply with the zone district where it's being constructed, as is the dimensional standard setbacks and everything. So no adjustments are needed, no variances are needed. There's already connections to water and sewer infrastructure, so no extensions are going to be required, no public improvements necessarily for this. And the roads and common areas within the parcel are all going to be owned by that same property owner. So here is where we're introducing the site plan process. The site plan process is going to be the application that they submit. They're going to submit the site plan with all the application submittal checklist requirements. It will include a development agreement, and it also will include the construction documents. We want to be clear, the development agreement is being tied to a site plan through request of town staff and town engineer, and it makes a lot of sense. And I think this was discussed with Planning Commission too, about really wanting to make sure the town has the security to make sure improvements occur that are proposed. So that development agreement is tied to a site plan to give you the town that security to make sure that the developer constructs what they're supposed to construct. So essentially, that site plan application is being reviewed for all of the relevant standards in the code: parking, landscaping, all of that. It's going to go out to referral agencies to make sure that, as we said, we already know water and sewer for this scenario exists, but we'd be looking at that. So then through that, it would get, in theory, approved by the town. After that site plan is approved, then the developer can go ahead and move forward with a pre-application or pre-construction meeting and start constructing their public improvements, and then move on to building permit. So what this is doing is giving the town the authority to review that site and make sure it complies with all code requirements, but also allowing the applicant to then move on pretty quickly into constructing, and sorry, this shouldn't say public improvements now that I look at it, but into building, and then getting their building permit followed by certificate of occupancies without having to return to town boards, because they've already had that site plan very clearly reviewed. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Can I ask what does DA/CDS mean?
Yeah, thank you. So development agreement will be the DA, and then CDs is going to be construction documents. And great question, because you're going to see that pretty much on every slide. I also, I'm on that, you will see SIA. If it's a subdivision, it's going to be a subdivision improvements agreement. So basically kind of your same type of tool, different terms based on it being a subdivision versus a site plan.
Gotcha. And this site plan, according to the chart down below, does go to the town manager or their designee, and then to the planning commission.
Correct. So site plans need to be thoroughly reviewed by town staff, including with a staff report, where you'll have all of the topics that are relevant in the code analyzed. And then, as noted before, as you said, planning commission is put in the chart. We don't know if that's going to be who the town decides they want the official decision maker to be.
So the way you've got it charted here, though, is that the planning commission has final decision. It doesn't even go to council.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
That would be unusual for whoever do things now, but
it will, and that's why we did it this way in a way, because we did know that we wanted to hear what people thought about that, with the knowledge that we're kind of moving it up from our original suggestion to go just administrative approval. Now we're bumping it up based on feedback we heard to planning commission, but we're not quite going to town council unless we hear that from everybody for feedback.
okay.
Just to clarify, just a couple of things, if I may, make a couple of hands up. One, currently, if this came in right now, it would have to go through a PUD process. Okay, so if it came in right now, it'd be a PUD. We're capturing everything that we would in a PUD process in the site plan. The idea again, though, is that the site plan process is meeting all of the standards in the code. So there's not things to really be interpreted, if you will. It's meeting the standards. So that's why not necessarily going through all of the public hearing processes. Yeah, so that's
And Terry's got his hand up on Zoom.
Yeah, hi. A real quick question. In your scenario descriptions, you list no extension of water, sewer infrastructure. Where in the process was that determined? Is it, how would the developer have determined that without going through the various steps?
TJ, do you want to weigh in on that one from your experience?
Yeah, so this would be a property that's already been subdivided. And now we're left with a 10-acre parcel that was originally subdivided. Gosh, I can't remember, 3 CPO, C3PO. The industrial lot in River Park, I never.
It's the mixed residential big triangle lot. Right.
No, not that one, the smaller one.
The smaller one.
Track D.
Track D, there you go, sorry. Track D, it's so it's already been subdivided, there's adjacent rights of way. The utilities are already in the roads, they're already, so the need to probably add taps maybe, but the property itself is ready for a pretty decent sized development. Another good one would be Riverfront Village. Could fall through this process as well. We actually use that a little bit later on for other scenarios, but again, through the pre-application meeting, through the discussions, through the completeness review, those are all evaluated at that time to determine if it can go to site plan or if some other process is needed. Did that help answer that question, Terry?
Yeah, thanks. I was just curious if I was a developer, would I have to have that knowledge ahead of entering the process? Or it sounds like there's legacy knowledge to these properties that would have already determined that.
Yeah, the town, in the pre-application meeting, the town looks at its water and sewer maps and knows where there's mains and.
Exactly. We get it. Sorry, I didn't make a good job, but we have a really good GIS map with layers that depict water and sewer utilities in the ground, not scientific by any means. And we get inquiries all the time from members of the public and developers about certain lots and where water mains and sewer mains are related to those lots. Like if the question would be if the lot is ready to be served by that. So Terry, we get inquiries all the time. Staff's ready.
I'm sure you have all the tools to answer the question. I guess my question was, if I were the developer, would that question be answered as part of the process, or would I have to come into the process already knowing the answer to that?
I would suggest that if you're a developer, you really need to know that through your due diligence process. So.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add to that, Terry, is for the the pre-application meeting is going to be, you're going to need to submit some type of very conceptual plan, but it won't be just, you can have informal meetings first, but the official pre-application meeting is going to you're going to have to present some type of a plan. So you'd want to do that due diligence before the official pre-application meeting comes in. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I think this is a fabulous addition to the code. I'm concerned about the visual presence here. It says that this is assuming a 10-acre parcel, and we're assuming that there's water and sewer available to that parcel. And then it speaks to that roads and common areas will be owned by a single property owner in the last bullet point. But then up in the flags up top, it talks about construction of public improvements. I'm thinking of this whole scenario here, there wouldn't be any public improvements, it'd be all private. Am I misinterpreting that?
No, you're correct. I apologize. That's a mistype on my end on the PowerPoint.
Although I can imagine a scenario where a lot has one side of it needing a public road to be completed. And then that's the public improvements. The roads and common areas that to be owned by the single property owner are roads and improvements within the parcel.
I don't think that this scenario B will actually exist out there without some type of public improvements. Is my point.
Well,
Yeah.
stormwater,
Either with fire hydrants or road.
stormwater improvements,
Fire hydrant.
depending on what's going on with the post.
So in concept, I really like it, but I think there'll always be some type of public improvement on private.
Would it be appropriate to term that infrastructure rather than public improvements?
We got a couple of other scenarios that touch on some of this discussion. I think where there is some public improvement and some not. So we wanted to show just a basic lot that can be developed as is, and it goes through a site plan process rather than a PUD process. I think that was the intent of this scenario. We'll get into some others that talk about, have some different assumptions as well. Does that, I don't want to, dismiss the comment or the question, but I also know that we have some other scenarios to talk about.
We're gonna ruin the surprise and tell you, you'll see, I think, a lot of what you're wondering about as we keep moving here. Okay. Anything else on this one, or should I move on to the next one?
Let's go.
Good.
Okay. All right, still kind of trying to stick to a pretty simple process for you before we get to the three a little bit more complicated ones. So scenario C, development of vacant industrial site. So this example is a previously platted vacant 2-acre industrial site. There is a proposed warehouse building with associated parking storage to be built on the property. Again, utilities are already stubbed to the property. And dimensional standards are almost all complied with, but the building height is not for the underlying zone district. So a variance is required for this development. So you're looking at a development which does not need a subdivision because it's already platted. You are looking at a variance that the applicant is requesting for a height exceeding the maximum height allowed for that zone district. And you're also looking at a new building with parking, sorry, there should be a comma in there, parking, storage, and some other obviously associated improvements that you would have with a warehouse building. So again, not looking at a PUD, you're looking at a site plan review. But before you go to that site plan review, the applicant needs to know, can they build a height higher than what the code allows? So the first step for that applicant is applying for that variance for the height. If that's approved, then the applicant moves forward with the site plan application submittal. Again, same application checklist, same review process that's being proposed. The planning commission at that point, after reviewing staff's recommendations and referral comments, would look at it and in theory say everything on this site plan meets all code requirements, parking, outdoor storage, screening requirements. You're in compliance with the variance that was approved already for the property. You're also looking at your, if there's any architectural details, design standards, I should mention, those are also looked at with this site plan review process. So again, moving forward, first variance, second step site plan, and then if approved, which will be approved if they meet all code requirements, they move on to that building permit stage.
And the current process under the current code would be a PUD again.
So typically, with a height variance in particular, we're looking for architectural redeeming qualities, etc. Whereas here, so I'm a little unclear on just saying, well, it needs to be 40 feet, and we just say, okay.
No.
No, variances are the criteria for variance or unnecessary hardship.
Right,
and all
yeah,
that. All those still apply.
Okay.
So they would.
So here he doesn't have to do a site plan until he gets his variance.
Or not.
So if he needs a 40-foot building and we don't let him do that, or wouldn't, he doesn't have to do the site plan and all his utilities. So he knows up front not to do that. So I think it's fabulous.
Okay.
And so all of the submittal requirements that you would currently look at for a height variance set would still be required. So you would be, the planning commission as the reviewer of the variance would still be looking at all the same stuff.
Right.
And what you'd be doing though is looking at it somewhat narrowly, saying, okay, is this request to increase the height mitigated by other design criteria or other design standards? And then that approval then gets carried through to the site plan process.
I have an example of this. I mean, there was a proposal to do a large brewery in the industrial lot at one point. And the town didn't want the brewery waste in their system. So therefore, they didn't have to go through a site plan.
Right.
They were gonna need a variance for sewer discharge. They weren't gonna get it. So that's an example of how this works.
So,
Okay, that answers.
and I guess the other part is you potentially have heard me say multiple times, managing the impacts, mitigating impacts at the time that you have them. And so what we're doing here is saying, okay, before you developers have to spend all of this money on a site plan or a building permit and put, start designing your truss load, you can come in and ask for a variance so that now you're not investing all of that money to design it far beyond what your approvals are. So that's the point, I think, of this scenario, that it gives an opportunity to look at that impact initially to give the developer, the property owner, confidence in investing more.
I just had a question because I still don't understand it. So when we approve a variance, and you have to show hardship, so they show hardship, we approve it here. They haven't built anything yet, so now they have to do the site plan. What if the site plan is different from what they presented to us, and they have a hard time seeing the hardship follow through when it changes to something else?
That is a very good question. I think what we need to do is make sure that, again, we're clarifying this process. And so we're also going to put in some timelines to say you don't, if your application is dormant for so long, it becomes invalid or void. And the reason being that in theory, what was approved at the variance is exactly what is submitted for site plan. And so, but we actually use this, maybe I'll hold off on this extended explanation a little bit more because wait for it. We use the firehouse as an example, and I think that's potentially exactly what you're referring to. So
question on scenario A, B, and C. These are all things that would have had to go through PUD.
And actually, I think I'm mistaken. This one potentially just a building permit.
Okay.
But the previous ones, yes, and that wasn't any, I was just kind of adding that for color commentary, if you will, to explain. That wasn't planned actually.
Because now you're the individual site levels.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, I guess I would say if they have two buildings on here, it would have to go through PUD process. Right.
TJ, so from a planning commission perspective, if something comes to us as a variance, and the benefit is that a developer doesn't have to have the site plan complete until they know that the variance can be approved, it seems like there'd be a lack of context for us to review a variance without understanding what the project is. And if the benefit is they don't have to do all of that ahead, it seems incongruent.
I might have misspoke,
Okay.
Or at least, it's a new process, site plan. To submit a variance, you're going to need to do a site plan. Site plan, though, is a two-dimensional layout. Whereas in this case, currently, you would have to do a variance with your building permit. And so the building permit, if you think about it, is a fully designed, engineered, structurally engineered document and plan set, basically 3 dimensions.
Yes.
So they will have to provide the site plan for it. So you all will see how it all fits together. That's part of the submittal checklist. And if they're going for height variance, there are elevations that are going to be needed. So there are probably some 3D models that are needed, right? So we're going to be talking about, and I know it's hard to imagine, but remember when you look through the plan, the draft code updates, the submittal requirements are extensively longer now in the draft than they are right now in the code. And so there would be required site plan, landscape plan, any kind of mitigation narrative. So that we, as either staff or you all as planning commission, have enough information to be able to make that interpretation or that judgment call of, is it adequate? Does that help? Because it's tying to a site plan, which is very simplistically a two-dimensional document versus building permit that is three-dimensional design.
I think so, yeah. I just was concerned that at the stage of reviewing it, we wouldn't have the information to review.
He's
But
gonna
it
have,
sounds like we would.
you're gonna have to bring enough stuff in to sell us.
Yeah, yeah.
You're gonna be a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So he's gonna have to sell it, so he's gonna have to do whatever that takes.
I think another good way to maybe explain a little bit on the variance too is you're not going to have a property owner just all of a sudden think in their head, I want to build a higher height. They're going to start planning out the development, putting together the site plan. And then they may realize due to site circumstances, they may want to request a variance. If that's the case, they may stop and not give you the parking layout potentially that may not be connected, but they're going to have to give you the elevations, the contours, everything that you're going to need to review that height and the potential hardship for it. So they're not just going to arbitrarily say, I'm going to apply for variance for height. They are starting their process and all of a sudden they realize they need it. They give you what's required to review based on everything you need, but they may just put part of that rest of the thing, information like parking and landscaping off until they see if they get that variance approved.
Yeah, that's clear.
Okay. Great.
Okay,
All right.
next.
All right. So now we get into the more fun ones because they're from a planner perspective, you get more applications and trying to figure out the flow of them. So what we did for the next three, we have three left for you. We have kind of what you've seen before as far as general layout in the table, but we also added a second screen for each, which is going to do an extra flow process for you. So I just want to, I'll go through both screens, see if it makes sense and then ask questions. Because I know with these being a little bit more in depth with multiple applications needed for planning review, this isn't going to be enough. This first screen is probably going to lead you to questions. So just bear with us as we get through the second screen also. Okay, so this one is going to be your firehouse development. You have an existing building on 2 lots. Those 2 lots are going to, as an end result, be consolidated into one. That is going to equal a lot consolidation application. So that's kind of going to be one thing to keep in your head. You have an existing building on 2 platted lots, but those lots need to be combined for the proposed development. You also have a proposed expansion of the building footprint and height. Now you're triggering the site plan application to be reviewed because the expansion proposed is large enough to trigger a site plan review. With the application and development, no variances are going to be required. And because there's already an existing building, no extension of utilities were required for this. So what you're looking at here is consolidating a lot, but also wanting to review the expansion of the building to ensure it meets the code with regards to parking, landscaping, architectural design standards, if for the addition that's being built, things like that. So the way that this process would work with what we're proposing in the code now is going to start with a lot consolidation. So the application will submit first to go and consolidate the lots. They also need that site plan review to analyze additional parking, landscaping, things like that. You're going to see on the next slide, we're encouraging these to be consolidated. So the applicant has to submit both applications, pay both application fees, follow both submittal checklists, but they can do it concurrently and run the lot consolidation and site plan through the town concurrently, which saves on time and reviewing and also allows town staff and including the planning commission and council to see that everything's synced up the way that it's going to meet all code requirements. So the way that we're looking, and then if assuming lot consolidation is approved along with the site plan, the applicant can move on to a building permit and then the condo plat. The reason the condo plat is put on here is in this case, in this scenario, different uses are going to be in there in tenant spaces, which are going to be sold. So in order to sell a unit, you have to divide that unit off to legally sell it. And that is where the condo plat process is coming in. You can't do that technically if you don't have walls in place to see where that you're going to be dividing it to sell it. So you're going to have the lot consolidation and site plan coming in. Then they're going to start building. And then when they have all their walls in, they're going to do that condo plat and come before you just as a quick administrative, look, we met our site plan, everything is in compliance. We just need to officially make these walls lots to sell. And we're going to create our common ownership and figure out how all the elements will be maintained for the future, things like that, as far as home HOA documents, that type of thing, which could be relevant. So kind of spelling this out a little bit more, the applicant's going to come in and they're going to have that pre-application meeting. Again, there's a bunch of steps involved, including the written summary that'll go out, things like that. When they're ready, they're going to submit the applications for lot consolidation and site plan review. Because site plan review is required, they're going to also be giving the construction documents. And sorry, this is development agreement to go with site plan. So then let's say everything gets approved. Post planning commission, they're going to address any special conditions that might have been tied to that site plan or lot consolidation improvement. They're going to record the lot consolidation. They're going to record the lot consolidation plat. And this is a subdivision improvements agreement because of the plat. So SIA and final plat get recorded. They then are going to submit right-of-way permit, which will be required through, I believe it's a different chapter of the code, and then submit for building permits. As those walls, after those walls are constructed, they'll come through again for the planning commission to look at the condominium plat, which again, you already know exactly what it is because you approved the site plan. This is just formalizing it so that they can sell those units. And then after that condominium plat is approved and recorded, then the town staff will do final inspections and the public and private improvements can be signed off on. So this is basically consolidating your initial subdivision process along with a site plan review to ensure that everything's going to meet the code. Then the applicant goes ahead and builds, and then they go ahead and plat those walls and sell the units to get, and then get everything signed off. The reason you can hold that public and private improvements up is because you have a subdivision improvements agreement that has been recorded on the property, and that will ensure that all improvements are complied with and met.
Jack has a question.
When you say right-of-way permit submittal, I'm confused, is that like a driveway permit or an encroachment permit? Encroachment permit, like an access permit?
We do those in conjunction with building permit.
So that's
And the inspection would happen before they were sold, is that correct?
They wouldn't be able to get a certificate of occupancy from a building standpoint until the lots were platted and that plat was recorded. So they'd record the plat and then they could get the certificate of occupancies for those building permits for people to move in. Does that make sense?
And one other question, process question, if we have already approved the condo portion, why do they need to come back to the commission rather than simply to town staff to get that condo plat? I don't see where, where we are needed in that portion of the process.
I thought you were going to say this was that last step was an administrative step.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
That's what I'm thinking you were going to say.
yeah.
So we have posed that question to Bo and he's looking into it as far as how plats would get signed, things like that, if it didn't go to the planning commission and or town council. It is done in other jurisdictions. Other jurisdictions, the condo plats, townhome plats are administratively approved by staff. However, there's also some hesitancy because this is a kind of a new concept, and with, you know, is this something that town staff can handle time-wise and everything also? So we're actually, great question. We have the same questions in our head and we've been discussing it during those meetings that Preston said we're really diving into things. And we also want to make sure we get the town attorney's insight on this one, that he's taking a look at this question too. So great thought on that one.
My take on it was that historically, planning commission has always approved all plats of any kind, and this would be a rubber stamp, it wouldn't be a big deal, but I could see going either way, but I can see why they left it this way for now.
Is there a scenario where it wouldn't be approved if it's already been?
Oh, boy, that's hard to imagine. The other thing I thought is that if the construction wasn't done right or something, I mean, to have a condo approved, you gotta have the proper firewall and all that. So, you know, that to me is why it's at the end of the process here, because you can't condominiumize something that's not built and built correctly, right?
And thought for inspection.
That's the flaw I've seen in this field. If somebody comes in and builds a building, like some large apartment building, and decides that he doesn't want to rent it, he wants to sell them, so he thinks about a condo plat long after we've already approved it. That would throw a wrench in this. The process they're proposing here is we would know upfront they're going to be condos. We know from day one that they're proposing condos. And if the developer didn't submit it to us that way, possibly the walls wouldn't be built correctly. And
At that point, they'd have to hire an engineering firm to go in and evaluate the construction.
they shouldn't be able to use this process. They're going to come in late, unless we know it's a condo front, then
They wouldn't in this scenario you're describing, I think.
Yeah, keep in mind, this is a very, very specific scenario. And the scenario you just suggested, I mean, that's totally different and it's a good scenario to pose, but
It happens.
this new application condo, plat or condo.
So this is a condo plat,
Condo plat.
condominium subdivision, yeah.
Yeah, again, new concept for Ridgway, and certainly someone's right to explore that if 10 years before they built a building with 10 rental units, right? So.
well, we've seen it before in the planning commission years ago where somebody built a duplex and sold a ranch, and then after they built, they said, "Oh, we want a condo."
Yeah.
And like, oh,
So if I may, just a couple of things too. There's a lot of conversation going on this one, but a couple. One, if you want to retrofit it, if you will, to be a condo, you have to get your building permit. You do your building permit to meet the current building codes, and that's fire code. So there's difference between the bedroom and living room wall in my home versus the partition wall between my home and Karen's home. Right, so that's a building code component, and it's not uncommon to go in and build that buffer in there. Sometimes it's just adding a couple extra sheets of yeah, right, some sheetrock, or adding, you know, there's a lot of ways to do that. So it would have to go through a building permit process. They could not sell those 2 units until they went through the condominium plat. So there are some checks and balances in there. Now, granted, you're always going to find loopholes and situations that we can't address per se, but the idea here is that we have a couple different scenarios. We have a lot of different applications coming in, or submittal requirements, and we're able to have that upfront conversation. Here's a good time to maybe say that what we went through this evening is a good example of this, where it was originally anticipated, I believe, to be townhomes. It was designed to be as such. What usually happens, and Katie has a lot more experience in townhomes and condos than I do, but what she has informed me about is that what we see down, they come in, get a site plan for a 3-unit townhome, fully anticipate selling those, and then you do the survey afterwards, and the building, the walls are 6 inches off. And so if you think about it and you do that beforehand, you now have to come back in because somebody owns 6 inches of your, you know, you're owns the TV on your wall, as opposed to the center line of the wall. So the idea is it's somewhat of a formality, but because we have a site plan process, we're able to evaluate it all holistically and then come in and clean it up at the end. And so, yes, you'll hear from Katie and I, our recommendation is always, if it meets the code and it's simple and it's just a rubber stamp, it should be administrative. But historically here, things have come to both planning commission and town council, so we're going to be very sensitive of that as well.
I don't think we should approve the plat also.
Yeah, and we don't. So we go through a site plan process. Then make sure that the overall project meets landscaping, it's parking. We know you put the future property lines on there, you know exactly where, as I went through this evening. Well, overall it meets it, but each lot, each of the 3 lots don't necessarily meet the strict interpretation of the site design standards because it wasn't built that way. Now we have the opportunity to be able to do that. So I think that's where I want to end on. Another component, just to touch on the firehouse, is that the site plan process would have caught the lot consolidation component much earlier on in the process, as opposed to with the building permit when we did catch it. The rest of it would probably run very similar. So I think here's a good example where the applicant would have done the same thing. We would have had information earlier in the process to be able to facilitate a more streamlined process, if you will, rather than kind of jumping back and forth a few times with that particular process. Sorry, did I answer all of the questions?
Looks like it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for your patience as we get through this too. I know it's starting to probably, you've been sitting there for a while, but okay. Scenario E, Riverfront Village. You have an approximately 8-acre vacant parcel adjacent to the river and Highway 550. Proposed mix of uses and building types, and they don't meet the zone requirements. So that right there is going to trigger in why we're going to talk about a PUD application, because the type of uses and are not going to comply with what's allowed by that zone district. There are proposed buildings, extension of water and sewer lines, parking, parks and trail dedications. This part of it is going to trigger a site plan application. And then at the end, the applicant is proposing to potentially sell some units that will trigger the condominium plat, which now you have a little bit more idea in your head of how that goes through. So with this one, we're going to start with the developer is going to have to submit a PUD zoning application. The reason for this is if they're not meeting the zone districts and they're trying to basically create a zone, overlay zone, their PUD, that would need to get approved before they can go ahead and tell the town, here's my site plan, it doesn't meet code. So the first step is the town reviewing the PUD, which includes a conceptual plan and the narrative, which basically has exceptions to that underlying zone district that they're requesting. If that PUD is approved, then that hash mark is going to go up on their zoning map to make it official, along being with recorded on the property to ensure that it's tied to that property.
Katie?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting. I just want to make this one clear because, well, they went through a PUD process before, and now you're doing a PUD plus all of this. How's this simpler? The idea is we're doing the PUD early on. It is zoning. You're looking at the uses that are allowed, the densities that are allowed, the standards that are in your current chapter 7. Okay, this is an overlay. So we have the GC zone district with some amendments on top of it. Now we're only looking at zoning. Currently, if we had that, you would, I'm going to go to the nth degree with it, that you would have to design both plan and profile. So that's horizontal and vertical for your water and sewer lines at that exact time. Does that make sense? So we're looking at just uses, density, zoning components rather than engineering components with this PUD process. Does that make sense?
The site plan.
I'm just talking the PUD process, right?
But the site plan is part of that PUD.
No, it's not. Well, a PUD development plan is.
Yeah.
To me, this makes more sense.
So we're setting up the zone districts that they then have to develop to, and now cue Katie to talk about site plan process.
Now they're gonna give you the site plan application, and that is gonna include on it what they're proposing for parking, parks and trail dedications, the building sites, the extension of utilities. All of that is included with the site plan application. So from a developer standpoint, they now know that what their zoning is. They are putting all the money into the construction documents and the development agreement, everything to submit to the town to get that site plan approved. But as TJ said, they're not having to do it before they even know if the town is okay with what they're proposing for types of buildings, for example. So they kind of is, in a way, it looks like more steps, but it's a cleaner way where they are walking themselves through the process, one step at a time, getting it okay, and then in theory, another okay, instead of having all of their money and design and engineering and everything come in up front when they don't even know if those uses are going to be okay. So they got the PUD, then they're going to submit the site plan and construction documents. Then, because this one does include the easements, those need to get recorded. They'll still have to go through the pre-construction meetings that occur right now. They'll start construction, they'll do the building permits, and then as we talked about with the last scenario, walls are up, they're ready to start selling their units. They're going to do that condo plat. The town's going to ensure that that is all in place, sign off on it, and then they can get building certificate of occupancies and sell the lots after that. So that going into this one, pre-application meeting helps them see this whole process and gives them the checklists. Again, PUD application, site plan application, condominium plat, and then the final sign-offs for improvements. Any questions on this one right now?
We're good. No.
All right. Last one for the evening on your scenarios, at least. Scenario F, Yellow Brick Lane. Okay, this one we save the one that has different options that the developer gets to choose. Basically, it's kind of like the old choose your adventure books based on their plan, and they would get this laid out for them again at the pre-application meeting. And it really depends on their timeline and their end goal of the development. So reason why you're going to see a couple ors in here is because same exact process, same start, same end product, but different ways to get there. So for this scenario, as you're aware, you have that 1 acre parcel. It's going to be subdivided into 12 lots for duplex homes. 0 foot side setback, since it's a duplex. You have smaller lot sizes, reduced front setback, and the density is also proposed to exceed zone districts. So first thing is, you're looking for things to exceed the zone district requirements. So you're triggering with that a PUD zoning so that you could hope the developer will hopefully get the okay to have excess density on this PUD along with smaller lot sizes and the reduced front setback. So the first step for them is going to be that PUD zoning, and they're going to develop that zone layer. Now, what they can do if they want to choose this track of the basically full site plan application submittal, they can go ahead and be planning on a subdivision while they're submitting their PUD. So your traditional subdivision, I'll call it, starts with a sketch plan and then moves into the preliminary plat and then a final plat. The applicant can follow those 3 normal subdivision process and tie it to the PUD zoning. And I'll break that down a little bit more in a second. The other option they can do is they can go ahead and decide that maybe they don't want to follow a sketch plan, a preliminary plat, and a final plat. They want to start with their zoning, and then they want to do that site plan option. Then they're going to build, and then they're going to end with a townhome plat. Now, what that townhome plat does is it's similar to the condo. You're creating that party wall in those duplex homes. Now, we'll also give a disclaimer that with this, we are proposing an amendment to the code because it's not clear in there that townhomes and duplexes should have a 0 side setback, which is common sense when you have a party wall. That is being put into the code because for common sense, they should have a 0 foot setback on just for party walls. So you're going to have a PUD zoning application. The applicant's going to decide if they're going to submit it with a sketch plan. We're going to take the top scenario first for a normal subdivision. They'll submit a sketch plan and at the same time they're applying for that PUD zoning. The PUD is approved, it's recorded on the property. Your hatch marks are going on the zoning map. And then the applicant is coming in with a preliminary plat, at which time they're also submitting the construction documents. They move forward to the pre-construction meetings and follow the subdivision process that is currently used today, but more clearly spelled out so it's easier to understand in the code. They do start that construction of improvements, and then as the improvements are constructed, they can come in for that final plat. After that final plat is approved, they move on to building permits. However, they still need to do something to be able to sell a duplex unit. So that's where that townhome plat comes in. Townhome plat will work on the name to make sure the definitions and everything make sense for a duplex. It could be duplex and townhome plat, might be easier to think of it tonight. But basically that would be one process that a developer could take. Now, the second option that they could choose to take is start just with the PUD and see if they can get those exceptions to the zone that they would like. If they get that approved, they come in with a site plan, including the construction documents and everything. So the town is still getting the security and the drawings that they would have gotten at preliminary plat. Now, your difference is the applicant moves into the construction process and the building permits, and then they end with a townhome plat to separate those lots. They basically have removed the final plat process from the application flow. However, they're still getting, the town is still having the same review, the same documents, and getting the same exact end result. This doesn't really help you too much. It's just all the different options of applications that they would go through. So this one being the normal subdivision process, you have the pre-application meeting. Again, submit PUD application and a sketch plan, move on to preliminary plat, record the SIA, have your right-of-way permit submitted, begin your improvements. Then you submit the final plat application and then final inspections, and then townhomes or a duplex plat is the end step, which is off of the page here. Yellow, and then the other option, I think you're really familiar with this now after the last few scenarios: PUD, site plan, final inspections. This is probably the most clear one to look at. So that's kind of the general overview. Again, it's a kind of the pre-application meeting is the point where staff explains all the processes, and then the developer reads the code and decides which process works better for the way their end product and their timelines. There may be, and we talked about this with the town engineer, there may be a time when the final plat may make more sense. And she did feel like that's still an option that people may take. And so whereas it looks like you kind of wonder why someone would go that route, there just could be a scenario that a developer may choose that route instead of a site plan.
I think where the scenario could be, Yellow Brick Lane, I think, is a bad example for the top, although that is the process that they went through, they're currently essentially going through. But if you think about it, they could subdivide it and then sell 3 or 4 of those lots. And those 3 or 4 lots could develop under the PUD.
A scenario where the top one would work was if developer was doing 5 or 6 townhouses and having an apartment building to rent.
Correct. And so that's why, you know, Katie and I actually struggled with this one, and why do we have both? And it's kind of fun struggling through that. At least I can enjoy that. But what this tells you is that there's options, and I think that's a positive too, right? You want to be able to adapt to the market needs and changing needs. And this is a good example of it. Hey, you know what, whatever you want, develop, maybe not whatever you want, right? Whatever your objectives are, let's talk about those and figure out how to get there while still not compromising the town standards and the town processes.
Yeah, I think the top will work, if it, especially if it's not gonna all be down. It's just like
Right.
a road commercial would count.
Yep, exactly.
So. And having been through that previous amendment application before looking at this one. Can you compare and contrast how this doesn't wind up in a situation where somebody's showing up to amend the plat to create two private lots further down the road?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
So we had a triplex that came in.
Yeah.
On a single lot. So. I'm assuming we want to avoid doing the neighborhood board. Is that something that gets caught in the sketch plan? And is now at CD, we're not going to amend the plat for a duplex that they want to sell off two sides? Or is that just all decided at the sketch plan level?
To potentially use correct terminology in that particular case, we have a subdivision that was approved. There's a large lot that is zoned and allows for 3 units. Then they would still come in, do a site plan for the triplex. Now I'm calling it a triplex because it's 3 units on 1 lot. So we're going to approve it like that with kind of like phantom property lines. So we're going to approve it, review it as a site plan, approve it against the dimensional standards, the design standards all together, but knowing that it's going to at some point come in as a town law. So then actually the way that it worked is actually how it would work, except it would be, they would come in, they would get a site plan approval, come and get building permits. Once it's built, come in for your town hall and now be able to sell. But they would have known early on.
Okay, that's good.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, the confusion tonight was that we've never done it that way before.
Yeah.
It's coming back.
That kind of gets a good example of how.
Correct.
This makes it more clear from the start, but it still has the town on plat happen at the end.
I think it gives some flexibility because what we've seen is pretty much all the same size townhouses and same size lots. I mean, it's conceivable that we'll see a little 1-bedroom next to a 3-bedroom on a bigger lot. So those lot lines need to be imposed after it's thought through and designed, maybe.
Right, the sketch plan, that's where you would, the sketch plan process would be.
Well, it'd be a developer decision or a builder decision. I mean, we're not going to always see 3-bedroom, 2 baths lined up. You know, hopefully we won't. And so there could be a 1-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 1. So now that's not our call. That would be the builder's call.
Everyone seems to totally get it.
So you all think about it at midnight and then the questions will start coming in. Well, with that, and we'll still go back to some more questions, I will give you our kind of status update on the timeline that we're at right now. We're at the scenarios work session for January when the community was invited. We, as I noted earlier, we do want to have some further discussions with the planning commission, also town staff, on some outstanding concerns. Some of that came up out of questions, concerns, not really the right word, it's just fine tuning, things like who the site plan, the final decision maker should be, things like that. And then obviously a planning commission hearing and town council hearing would be upcoming also. I did want to let you know, as we told you in November, you saw documents for each chapter back then. Any changes that we are making since November 29th, the last copy you had, is all being done with track changes. So you are going to see every single little thing that was modified, including things like the title and the reference to the title that you brought up, working days, things like that. So it will be a little bit convoluted, but we really wanted to make sure that we were very clear and that everybody saw and no one felt like they were missing something that could have gotten changed that they weren't aware of. So when you start getting things again, they all will be in track changes, and it will be everything that has been made since November 29th. So.
Kristen, is there anyone have hands up on Zoom? Well, I guess you guys did a very thorough job.
We don't have a lot of people on Zoom at this point.
Oh,
No, that's what we're going for.
Developers,
yeah.
there's 4 people that are.
A couple of them, they're developers.
Either planners. or
Raise your hand
planning
if you're a
commissioners.
developer. Anything else from us for this?
So thank you, Katie. That was very thick, very quick. It's a lot to unpackage, digest. But I don't know, did you all find that at least a little helpful?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I thought it was easy.
It wasn't that bad.
It was well done.
Cool. So yeah, no, that's if you have any questions as you start thinking through things, yes, these are the odd things. But what about this?
If you wake in the middle of the night.
Send an email, you know, and I think if we're at kind of a point now where we could use kind of the terminology and say, oh, well, what about this situation? Well, they would need to do a PUD to address this, and then they need to go through a site plan and then a townhome plan. Right now, I think we all have kind of at least a little bit better idea of real world application of some of these terms that we so if nothing else, I think we have now established that. So I have to say, I'm kind of excited about it. I think it's going to be great for the town. Just in the struggles that we have had as staff, struggles that I personally have had trying to explain how the code applies to an application. I think we're moving in the right direction while not compromising the values of the town and the processes of the town. So let's get off my little soapbox on that.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, and don't hold back negativities. Like if you really have a red flag in your head, we'd rather know it sooner rather than later so that we can work through it with you and kind of adjust to make sure we're proposing what the town wants and we don't kind of hit some obstacle at the end when it's kind of coming up for those final public hearings. So don't feel bad if you have criticisms. If you don't like something, we'd rather hear it sooner rather than later, and we'll help kind of talk it out and figure out the best way to go for everybody. So
I have a concern. I'm not sure it's appropriate tonight, but when in reading the 168 pages, I read through it, talked about developers assessing the water that the town has and having to show the town that the town has the water for his development. And the way I read that is that if we had, say we had 3 development proposals in front of us, we're gonna have 3 different guys analyzing our water district. Which I found intimidating. I think if I was the town, I wouldn't want 3 developers poking around my water system, telling me what I have. So that was a concern that I saw, that we could get 3 different ideas of what our capacity is, and I suspect we already know what our capacity is. So that was something I read there. I mean, if it was my water district, I wouldn't want anybody stupid in it but me. But so that I saw that there. And then another thing that I saw is in the annexation part of it, it spoke to a developer needing to bring with his development, his annexation proposal, the water that he needed for his development. And conceptually, I'm fine with that. But what happens if it doesn't happen? You know, let's say that we had a 10 or 20 acre piece of property that wanted to get annexed, and I don't have one in mind, so don't misinterpret this. And they didn't have water, would he be required to go get it? And that seemed to be not addressed. However, we do it is fine, but I think it needs to be clear as a bell.
Well, except for, I mean, if you're talking annexation, we're always in the driver's seat with annexation. We can acquire anything we want. The way I've always understood our general take on annexation is that if somebody wants their property annexed and we agree to hear the request, consider it, we want them bringing any water they have to the table. They
That's
don't
not
have
what
water.
this says.
Well, that's because this is the new draft, so, and it's a new world when it comes to water, so, you know, I think, you know, I can't remember last time we annexed was Riverside, Riverside. We got some water out of that, and we also got an incredible amount of river frontage, but, I think going forward, we're gonna take annexation really seriously, and I think it's within our rights to say that they need to go find some water. How we deal with that, I don't know.
I'm not trying to make policy, I'm just trying to make this process clear.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm familiar with the town policy in the past, and it served us well. But it doesn't say that if you don't have water and you give us some river, we'll work with you. I mean, I think we need to. It says the developer needs to supply all the water he's going to use when he comes in the door. And conceptually, I'm not opposed to that. Again, not trying to make policy, but I think he should be able to support. Maybe it's a new school instead. So
I'm not sure it's that kind of drive.
I don't know that it is, but in general, you know, and I have to like that. I don't remember exactly what we wrote in the annexation policy.
I just what I read.
Communities, but in general, yes, what you want is at very minimum development to bring its own water, especially new development that's not contemplated in your capacity right now. What shade of water that is, I don't know necessarily matters as long as you can get it to your pipes, right? That's where it all comes from.
I'd be more comfortable with said bring water or equivalent. Equivalent? Yeah, like a new school.
So you can like, they can pay fee in lieu.
Fee in lieu.
Right,
Paved
something
road.
like that. Yeah,
Yeah, it's something of value.
correct.
Where here, I read it late at night and I probably wasn't paying good attention, but I mean, I thought it was boilerplate. It had to be water. And I thought I would want to negotiate for.
Yeah,
if
and
I didn't have water.
fully understand, we can look at that. On the, I can't remember the exact other one, but about developer analyzing water supply. If you don't mind trying to find your note on that and let us know where it is.
Join in here.
Because potentially what that is referring to is statutory requirements of ensuring that there's adequate water supplies for any subdivision. And I know it might not be, but if you don't mind just trying to find the specifics and we can.
Again, I don't have any problem with the idea
Right.
or the policy. Is the way I read it is the developer has to tell the town as a submittal that the town's water supply is adequate.
I didn't read it that way, but I think.
Well, I might have read it wrong,
I think
but that's the way I read it.
So
We need
the
to
other
resolve.
The other thing, just in very broad brush concept, having that conversation with a couple of jurisdictions too, that the town is municipalities, government is set up as a reviewing and checking the boxes agency. Not to use derogatory words, but not a doing entity, right? So you require somebody to do something, submit it and say, here's how we're meeting your requirements. And then we review it and say, here's how you either are or are not. And so potentially, and again, I don't know exactly what you're referring to, but that could be the concept that, okay, you tell us how much water you need to do what you're doing.
Right.
We'll review it against our portfolio and make sure we have enough, or you're gonna have to bring more.
That's the
Right.
way, that's
So-
the way I've understood.
That's, but again, we're
That's the way I
gonna.
thought I should read, but that's not, I didn't remember that's the way I read it. That's what I was expecting it to say.
Gotcha.
I read it that they had to show us that we had enough supply. I was like, I could see 4 different developers crawling around the water treatment facility. I was like, that ain't.
Yeah, no, that's why I don't think it actually. It said
So
that-
maybe I read it wrong.
we'll take a look at that. That's a good thought and we'll figure it out. I think it sounds at least like we're on the same page and maybe we just need to make that language in the code reflect it if it doesn't right now.
Very diplomatic, Katie. Thank you.
I think we should tell them if we have enough water, not them will tell us.
Well, that's why the typical way you do it is that their job is to engineer how much water they're gonna need, and we decide.
Yeah, that's what it should be.
What else?
I don't read that, but that's fine.
Anybody? Preston?
On this topic.
Yeah.
Open floor.
Anybody got anything much?
That's her.
Right, yeah, thank you for taking the time. The whole evening, and Katie, thank you for leading us to that exercise, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie.
Yes. So do we know when we're gonna see you again? Are we looking at scheduling additional meeting or are we there yet?
Well, Katie, do you wanna?
Talk or show a screen? I could put the same timeline up, but it doesn't have a lot of info. What TJ and I were thinking, and we have to talk to Preston more, is we feel like we probably need a couple of weeks to continue making changes based on the comments we got already. We haven't finalized everything we heard, and then we really didn't want to make the process kind of changes and track changes until we had this meeting tonight. So we maybe, I don't want to say we're behind on schedule, but we were waiting to get more feedback so we didn't duplicate our work or have to do something and then redo it again. If we had different feedback than we were thinking we could. So we expect in our heads, we would probably say we need about a month before we bring everything forward to you. But we can have discussions before that. We can kind of see what your and Preston's timeline are, obviously, and then TJ will coordinate kind of workloads and all of that.
So based on everything we've talked about and kind of what I think we have to do left, we're probably looking at another update discussion work session at the maybe the regular January meeting, so the end of January, and then bringing it hopefully ordinance in February, so the end of February. Now, what that does, I do believe, potentially pushes the moratorium out. So that's why I bring that up, that we're looking at the March 31st deadline. I think, or Katie and I are going to make a big push to try to get the updated red lines out as soon as possible, knowing that, but probably need one, potentially two more work sessions to work through some of these issues.
So should we look at having an extra meeting in sometime in February to help that along? Or is this based on your workload?
You know, I think at this point,
We can discuss it again in 3 weeks.
correct, that I think is it, right? So that's the milestone. Let's see how far Katie and I can get, see where we're at, what issues we are able to talk about and not resolve in January, at the January 31st meeting. And from there, we can look at if we want to do a special meeting the middle of February, or what that might be. I think that then gives you all a better idea of the timeline, and then we still have time to potentially post something to the council about the moratorium.
Because I think we would be willing to do that in early February or early March as needed to try to meet the deadline
Right.
if it's possible.
All the pages on January 31st.
Yeah.
There's,
Sounds good.
but at this point, like he alluded to, the moratorium will most likely need to be extended. So,
I've said this before, I think this is a huge project. I think a 30-day extension is no big deal on this project this size. I think 90 days is reasonable. So I think we should do this thoroughly and do it at the pace we need to and not worry about the date. That's one vote.
I'm in agreement.
Take all the time
It's
you
a
want.
big deal.
Do you hear that, TJ? We will still move as fast as we can move for you. So we don't want to be a delay on our end at all, so.
Which is what I was saying on our side. We don't want to hold it up. So great, thanks.
So do what we can, bring it up the 31st and discuss next steps This was really helpful to even hear the conversations, understand what the confusion was. Where there might be some still confusion, and we can clarify it too. So I think this was from our end too, very helpful. As well, so. Thank you very much, Katie.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
You too, thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for coming.
Happy New Year.
Yes, you too.
It's summertime, it wouldn't even be dark yet. So next we have approval of the minutes from the regular meeting of November 29th.
Move to approve. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Unanimous. Other business updates from planning commission members. Does council have anything for us? I saw there was a affordable housing thing on the agenda for tomorrow, but it appears that it's just to talking about identifying funding sources. Anything else that we need to know about from council?
I guess one thing that just occurred to me, one of the things on our agenda tomorrow night is to try and find a council member or someone to serve on the Home Trust of Erie County's Board of Directors. Nonprofit now. And if there isn't a council member willing or able to do it, is any of you interested? Maybe, is it the first Wednesday of the month, Preston?
I don't remember. I think it might be the first Wednesday.
I mean, I would be interested, but I'm on a board of a homeless shelter. I'm not sure how much time that's gonna take for me.
I'm hoping somebody on council will step up, but
If they don't want me, I'm a sucker.
Maybe,
Maybe,
maybe.
big maybe from all of you.
Yeah,
Someone-
if you don't get someone on council, come back to us,
All right, will do.
either an email or at the next meeting. Does anyone else have anything? Is anyone gonna be away? We all good? There's always Zoom.
I am going to Zoom on the next meeting. Because I'm leaving just a few days after that for an overseas trip. And don't want to be in a room with 60 of my closest friends. So I'll be Zooming.
Okay,
I'm working all of February, so I'll just have to see,
okay.
especially if we have an extra meeting.
Yeah, just let Preston know, just so we know, that we're gonna have enough people. If you can't Zoom, whatever, just so that he knows going into it. We've been fine. I've never had everyone here in person in the year plus that I've been sharing. So this is new.
I'm here for the duration.
Yeah, it's really good. It is.
I'm all bad at it.
Preston, do you have anything for us? TJ, you got something else?
One real quick thing, and hopefully it's okay. Tomorrow night at planning commission. We're gonna
At
be-
council?
Sorry, council. We're gonna be proposing a process to update the comprehensive plan. Not update the comprehensive plan itself, but to amend it. So right now, the master plan says there's like a paragraph or two that says you can amend it, but it doesn't give any real guidance. So we're going to be presenting a pretty thorough process so that if somebody comes in, a developer or a property owner wants to amend the comprehensive plan, the master plan, we have a process for doing that. So just let you all know. That's going to be discussed tomorrow night as well.
Great. I would say, no one has anything else. But you're.
We don't get the motion for adjournment?